Knights Templar. A historical overview. The medieval world gave rise to one of history's most intriguing groups, the Knights Templar. Emerging from the chaotic aftermath of the First Crusade, this military order started as a small team of knights committed to safeguarding pilgrims traveling the perilous roads to Jerusalem. Their transformation from simple protectors to a powerful force that influenced kings and popes is one of the most fascinating stories of the Middle Ages. These warrior monks enjoyed a unique level of independence, answering directly to the Pope and stepping beyond the usual feudal system. Their iconic white mantles adorned with red crosses became symbols recognized throughout Europe and the Middle East, evoking both admiration and fear. In just a few decades, they evolved from a modest brotherhood into a sophisticated organization that blended military prowess with groundbreaking financial strategies. The Knights Templars' history stretches nearly 2 centuries, from 1119 to 1312 A, intertwining with the Crusades, the rise of early banking systems, and the shifting power dynamics between medieval Europe and the Islamic world. Their dramatic downfall, marked by accusations of heresy, secret trials, and public executions, remains one of history's most infamous political conspiracies. What makes the Templar story especially captivating is how it reflects the contradictions of medieval Christianity. Warrior monks who vowed poverty while accumulating immense wealth. Religious figures who negotiated with Muslim leaders. And defenders of Christendom whose fiercest foes turned out to be the very European powers they had long served. In 1119 A.D., 9 French knights approached King Baldwin II of Jerusalem with a groundbreaking idea for a new type of religious order. This moment kicked off an institution that would change medieval politics, finance, and warfare forever. The poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon, the origins of the legendary Knights Templar. The world before the Templars. The world that gave rise to the Knights Templar was undergoing some serious changes. As the 11th century came to a close, Europe found itself at a crossroads of faith, power, and ambition. To really get why this revolutionary military order popped up, you need to grasp the complex backdrop it emerged from. A continent shaped by feudalism, a powerful church, and a growing interest in the Holy Land. Medieval European society was all about the feudal system, a hierarchy that tied people together through mutual obligations of service and protection. At the top were monarchs, but their actual power was often pretty limited. Below them, influential nobles held vast territories, controlling networks of vassals who promised military service in exchange for land and security. This fragmented political scene created a patchwork of competing interests, with violence and territorial disputes being part of daily life. The Catholic Church acted as the glue holding everything together, crossing political boundaries. By the late 11th century, it had become the most powerful and widespread organization in Western Europe. The Cluniac reforms from earlier decades boosted the Church's independence from secular control and centralized authority under the papacy. Religious doctrine had a massive impact on every aspect of medieval life, from royal politics to the daily routines of peasants. Christian teachings provided the moral compass through which Europeans understood their world and their place in it. Under Pope Gregory VII, who led the Church from 1073 to 1085, religious authorities started asserting their supremacy over secular powers in what scholars call the investiture controversy. This key conflict was all about whether emperors or popes should appoint high church officials. But it also represented a bigger struggle over the relationship between spiritual and worldly authority. The humiliation of Emperor Henry IV at Canossa in 1077, where he reportedly stood barefoot in the snow for 3 days seeking papal forgiveness, symbolized the growing power of Rome's religious leadership. While Europe was going through these internal shifts, a very different civilization was thriving across the Mediterranean. The Islamic world of the 11th century was at the height of achievement in many fields. From Baghdad to Cordoba, Muslim scholars preserved and built upon ancient Greek knowledge, advancing in areas like mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and architecture, while European societies lagged behind. The Holy City held deep religious significance for Christians, Muslims, and Jews alike. For Muslims, it was their third most sacred site after Mecca and Medina. The Dome of the Rock and Al-Aqsa Mosque stood as stunning examples of Islamic reverence for this ancient center of faith. Since the 7th century conquest by Caliph Umar, successive Muslim rulers had generally allowed Christian pilgrims access to sacred sites, though conditions varied depending on the administration. By the mid-11th century, control of the Holy Land had shifted to the Fatimid Caliphate of Egypt. However, things got rocky as the Seljuk Turks, recent converts to Islam, expanded their territory through military conquest. Their victory over Byzantine forces at Manzikert in 1071 dealt a serious blow to the Eastern Roman Empire and changed the balance of power in the region. The Seljuk advance threatened established pilgrimage routes and ramped up Western concerns about access to sacred sites. For centuries, European Christians had made tough journeys to Palestine as acts of deep devotion. These pilgrimages were both spiritual quests and forms of penance, with many believing that prayers offered at sacred locations brought special grace and forgiveness of sins. By the late 11th century, these religious journeys had become increasingly dangerous. Travelers faced not just natural hazards like disease, starvation, and harsh weather, but also the constant threat of bandit attacks, which were especially risky for vulnerable pilgrims carrying valuable offerings for holy shrines. Reports of mistreatment of Christian pilgrims, whether exaggerated or not, circulated throughout Europe. These stories found a ready audience in a continent already experiencing a religious revival and heightened interest in expressions of piety. The idea of armed pilgrimage, which mixed devotion with military action, started to take shape in the European mindset. Against this backdrop, Byzantine Emperor Alexios I Komnenos sent envoys to Pope Urban II, asking for military help against the Seljuk Turks. While he was mainly focused on reclaiming lost Byzantine territory, this appeal sparked a much larger movement. At the Council of Clermont in November 1095, the Pope delivered a speech that would change history. Urban's address skillfully blended religious passion with political savvy. He called on Christian warriors to stop fighting among themselves and instead channel their martial energies toward reclaiming the Holy City. Deus vult, God wills it, became the rallying cry as thousands took up the cross, sewing it onto their garments as a symbol of their sacred vow to liberate Christ's birthplace. The pontiff offered significant spiritual incentives for participation, a plenary indulgence promising forgiveness for all temporal punishment for sin. For medieval Christians deeply concerned about salvation, this spiritual reward was a powerful motivator. Plus, the Eastern expedition offered second sons of nobility, those unlikely to inherit family estates, an opportunity for wealth, land, and glory in far-off places. What followed was the First Crusade, an unprecedented military campaign starting in 1096, that mobilized tens of thousands across Western Europe. After the disastrous People's Crusade led by Peter the Hermit ended in tragedy, the main Crusader armies, made up mostly of French and Norman knights, set off in August of that year. Against all odds, these forces captured Antioch in June 1098 after a grueling siege, finally reaching their ultimate destination in June 1099. The siege lasted just over a month before the walls were breached. On July 15, 1099, what followed remains one of the darkest chapters in Crusader history. A brutal massacre of Muslim and Jewish inhabitants that shocked even contemporary chroniclers. Raymond of Aguilars, an eyewitness, described Christian warriors wading ankle-deep in blood at the Temple Mount. While likely embellished, such accounts reflect the extreme violence that accompanied the conquest. With their goal achieved, the victorious forces established the Kingdom of Jerusalem and several other Crusader states, collectively known as Outremer, or the land beyond the sea. Godfrey of Bouillon became the first ruler of the newly won territory, taking the humble title Defender of the Holy Sepulchre instead of king. After his death in 1100, his brother Baldwin I accepted the crown, starting a dynasty that would govern the sacred city for nearly 9 decades. This incredible victory, however, brought about significant challenges. Most Crusaders returned to Europe after fulfilling their religious vows, leaving the newly established Christian state seriously undermanned. The remaining European population, a minority ruling over a predominantly Muslim populace, controlled only major urban centers and strategic routes, not the surrounding countryside. Their survival depended on keeping secure connections to Europe for reinforcements, supplies, and new settlers. This tricky situation made travel between coastal ports and inland holy sites incredibly dangerous. Local hostile forces continued to control much of the surrounding territory, while bandits specifically targeted religious travelers along these vulnerable routes. Christian pilgrims, having already endured tough journeys across land and sea, often fell victim to violence before reaching their sacred destinations. It was in these perilous conditions that a French knight named Hugues de Payens came up with a radical solution, a religious order dedicated specifically to protecting pilgrims. In 1119, nearly 20 years after the First Crusade's success, he and 8 fellow knights took solemn vows before Patriarch Warmond and King Baldwin II, establishing the poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon, the nascent brotherhood that would evolve into the legendary military order that transformed medieval society. Birth of the order. In the early 12th century, Christian pilgrims were facing some serious dangers on their journeys to sacred sites. That's when Hugues de Payens stepped up with a vision and determination. This French knight from Champagne had fought in the First Crusade and saw a big problem. The newly established Kingdom of Jerusalem couldn't protect the faithful traveling across its lands. Driven by his deep religious devotion and a practical mindset, Hugues gathered 8 knights who shared his passion. Some of their names are still remembered today: Godfrey de Saint-Omer, Payen de Montdidier, Archambault de Saint-Aignan, André de Montbard, Geoffrey Bisset, and Gondomar. These guys were the cream of the crop in European knighthood, skilled warriors who knew their way around mounted combat and had plenty of battlefield experience. What set their mission apart from typical knightly ventures was its spiritual side. In a solemn ceremony in front of King Baldwin II and Patriarch Warmond, these 9 knights took monastic vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, something totally new that combined religious commitment with martial skill. They dedicated themselves to a unique mission: to protect vulnerable pilgrims, traveling the treacherous roads between the coastal port of Jaffa and the inland holy sites. The timing couldn't have been better. King Baldwin II saw the value in having such a dedicated protective force. The young kingdom was constantly threatened by surrounding Muslim territories, and its military resources were stretched thin, trying to defend urban centers and strategic fortifications. Having a mobile force specifically focused on securing travel routes was a big deal that royal forces just couldn't manage alone. In a significant move, Baldwin granted the new Brotherhood quarters on the Temple Mount, right next to the Al-Aqsa Mosque in his royal palace. This location was deeply symbolic. Built on the ruins of what Christians believed to be Solomon's Temple, it was seen as the spiritual heart of the Holy City. The Knights took their name from this prestigious headquarters, the poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon. Choosing the Temple Mount as their base was meaningful in many ways. Practically, it gave them a strategic spot to organize their patrols. Symbolically, it linked them to biblical traditions of sacred guardianship. Some scholars even think the founders were inspired by stories of the ancient Levites who guarded Solomon's original temple. This connection to sacred history would become a key part of the order's identity and mystique. Despite having royal backing, the Brotherhood started out with very limited resources. Accounts from that time describe them as so poor that two knights would share a single horse, an image that later became famous in their seal, showing two mounted men on one steed. They relied on donated clothes and weapons, depending on charitable contributions for their basic needs. This genuine poverty matched their monastic vows and set them apart from the often flashy display of secular knighthood. Their daily grind involved escorting pilgrim groups along the most dangerous stretches of road, especially the route from the coastal landing at Jaffa through the bandit-infested hills to sacred destinations. Using tactics honed during the Crusade, they organized travelers into protected convoys, placed armed knights at the front and back, and kept a watchful eye out for ambushes. Thanks to these systematic protective measures, they quickly earned a reputation for reducing pilgrim casualties. For nearly 10 years, the Brotherhood worked humbly, slowly building a name for themselves based on their disciplined effectiveness and religious commitment. Yet, even with their practical success, they faced skepticism from both religious and secular circles. The idea of warrior monks was a tough sell for many in medieval society. Traditional monastic orders emphasized peace, humility, and separation from worldly affairs, while knightly values celebrated martial prowess, honor, and glory. By merging these seemingly opposite ideals, the Temple Knights challenged the established social norms. The European religious establishment was particularly concerned about armed monks. How could men who shed blood, even for a righteous cause, live up to the spiritual ideals of monastic life? This theological dilemma needed to be resolved before the Brotherhood could gain broader acceptance and support. Their unique status also raised practical questions about governance and accountability. As knights, should they answer to secular authorities? As monks, did they fall under church jurisdiction? This tricky position between these worlds created administrative headaches for both royal and church officials. Despite these challenges, the practical value of their service led to growing support. More knights, inspired by their example, wanted to join their ranks. Pilgrims who had experienced their protection spread the word about their effectiveness throughout Christendom. Their distinctive look, initially just simple white mantles symbolizing their pure purpose, became recognized along the roads of the Holy Land. Eventually, news of this innovative order reached influential figures in Europe, especially Bernard, Abbot of Clairvaux, who was a nephew of one of the founding knights, André de Montbard. Bernard was a big deal, with unmatched moral authority as the leading religious figure of his time. His sharp intellect and reputation for holiness made him the perfect advocate for the fledgling brotherhood. Although he was initially skeptical about the idea of warrior monks, Bernard soon saw their potential as a force for righteous protection. Hugues knew that if his order wanted to grow and make a real impact, it needed the backing of the top authorities in Western Christendom. So, around 1127, nearly 10 years after starting the order, he took a small group to Europe to seek papal approval and recruit more knights. This journey turned out to be a game-changer for the Brotherhood, transforming it into something way bigger than what its founders probably imagined. The timing was spot on, too. Concerns were rising about the safety of the Crusader states, especially after some military setbacks that showed just how vulnerable Christian territories in the East really were. Hugues cleverly positioned his order as part of the solution, presenting them as dedicated warriors who could mix religious devotion with military skill. As he traveled through France, England, Scotland, and Flanders, Hugues caught the attention of nobility who were impressed by the order's mission. The big moment came at the Council of Troyes in January 1129, where a gathering of church leaders discussed the Brotherhood's status. Thanks to Bernard of Clairvaux's powerful support, the poor fellow soldiers got formal recognition from the church. This was a major turning point for the order. With Bernard's guidance, they established a formal rule for the Brotherhood, taking inspiration from the Benedictine and Cistercian traditions, but tweaking it to fit their military goals. This rule laid out their spiritual duties and combat responsibilities, setting a solid foundation for growth. Bernard even wrote a treatise called In Praise of the New Knighthood, which provided a religious justification for warrior monks and addressed many concerns about their unique role. The new rule also created a clear hierarchy, with the Grand Master at the top and various roles like seneschal, marshal, and draper. It balanced daily religious practices with military training, ensuring knights lived a structured life. Plus, strict behavior codes were put in place, banning things like hunting for fun, gambling, and even hanging out with women, even if they were family. This all helped create a distinct and austere image that set them apart from regular knights. After getting that official thumbs up, Pope Honorius II put the order directly under papal authority, which meant they didn't have to answer to local bishops or secular rulers anymore. This level of independence was huge for their future, letting them operate across political borders as an international group that answered only to Rome. Their simple white mantle got a serious upgrade too. A red cross was added by Pope Eugenius III to symbolize martyrdom. This eye-catching emblem became their trademark, earning them respect and a bit of fear across 2 continents. With the church backing them and their reputation on the rise, donations started pouring in from all over Europe. Wealthy nobles opened their wallets, giving land, castles, and income to support the cause. Young knights, especially those who weren't in line for an inheritance, were eager to join up. What kicked off as just 9 knights sharing a horse turned into a well-known institution in just 10 years, with resources multiplying like crazy. When the Temple brothers returned to the Holy Land after their European adventure, they brought back not just new recruits and wealth, but also a whole new identity. They weren't just a local protective group anymore. They had become the first military religious order in Christian history, a game-changing force that would alter warfare, finance, and religious life in ways their humble founders could hardly have dreamed of. The politics of Outremer. So let's dive into the fascinating world of Outremer, the Crusader states that popped up after the First Crusade. These territories, which means the land beyond the sea, were totally different from anything happening in Europe at the time. They were this unique mix of Christian lands carved out of Muslim regions, creating a whole new vibe in medieval governance. If you want to get why the Templar Order became such a big deal, you really need to grasp the political scene they were in. At the heart of it all was the Kingdom of Jerusalem, stretching from the Mediterranean coast all the way to the Jordan River. Surrounding it were the County of Tripoli, the Principality of Antioch, and the County of Edessa, each with its own ruler and set of rules. Picture a narrow strip of Christian rule, sandwiched between powerful Muslim states on nearly every side. The whole setup was like trying to fit European feudalism into a Middle Eastern context, which was no easy feat. Baldwin I became the first king of Jerusalem and laid down a feudal system where European nobles got land in exchange for military service. But here's the catch. There weren't enough European settlers, so local Christian and Muslim officials often ended up running the show. Unlike Europe, where borders were pretty stable, the frontiers in Outremer were always shifting, with territories changing hands like a game of hot potato. Jerusalem developed some pretty unique political structures. The High Court, made up of major feudal lords, advised the king and kept royal power in check. Unlike in Europe, where succession was mostly hereditary, the crown in Jerusalem was technically elective, although it usually stayed within the same family. When there weren't any male heirs, women could inherit the throne, which was way more common here than back in Europe. This sometimes led to some messy succession disputes that could really weaken the kingdom at crucial moments. Now, enter the Templar Knights, who were both part of this political landscape and their own independent force. Their relationship with the kings of Jerusalem changed a lot over time. In the early days under Baldwin II, who gave them their headquarters on Temple Mount, the Templars were in a good spot, enjoying royal favor while they got their mission off the ground. Their main job was to secure safe roads for pilgrims, which lined up perfectly with the king's interest in keeping the realm safe. As they gained wealth and military strength, they took on more responsibilities in defending the kingdom. By the mid-12th century, they were building and garrisoning castles along vulnerable borders, transforming from just a backup security force into key players in the kingdom's defense. Things got more complicated during King Fulk's reign, who ruled Jerusalem through his marriage to Queen Melisende. Fulk, new to the politics of Outremer, needed solid allies among the nobility. The Templars, with their growing reputation and direct link to the Pope, were a perfect counterbalance to local interests that sometimes pushed back against royal authority. But there was tension in this relationship. The Templars didn't pay royal taxes and were directly accountable to the Pope, which made them a bit of a wild card within the kingdom. When their interests lined up with the king's, it was great for the realm. When they didn't, it caused friction that could undermine a united front against outside threats. Beyond Jerusalem, the Templars were building political ties in the other Crusader states too. In the county of Tripoli, they got some sweet land grants from Count Raymond II, including key mountain passes that controlled access to the interior. In Antioch, they had a more cautious relationship with princes who were often tangled up in Byzantine politics. Their presence in Edessa was limited until that county fell to Muslim forces. A real wake-up call about how vulnerable isolated Christian territories could be. The political scene in Outremer was also shaped by its interactions with neighboring Muslim powers. Contrary to the idea that it was all about constant warfare, there were plenty of times when diplomacy and coexistence took center stage. Trade was crucial for survival, creating interdependencies that sometimes crossed religious lines. Treaties for temporary truces or defining areas of influence were common, with the Templars sometimes acting as go-betweens because they were known for sticking to agreements. As the Templars became more influential, they got caught up in the factional struggles that plagued the Crusader states. Noble families were always vying for power, forming alliances that shifted based on immediate needs rather than any consistent principles. European-born Crusaders often clashed with second-generation settlers, who they called Poulangs. These locals had different views on how to coexist with Muslim neighbors, and sometimes pushed for more, accommodating policies that newcomers saw as a threat to Christian interests. The Templars usually sided with the hardliners, focusing on military solutions for security. This perspective came from their experience protecting travelers from raiders who took advantage of any weakness in defense. But it sometimes put them at odds with rulers looking for diplomatic solutions to ongoing military shortages. The rivalry between the military orders added another layer of complexity. The Hospitallers, initially a medical group caring for pilgrims, had developed their own military branch, partly in response to Templar success. Even though they served different functions, the two orders competed fiercely for donations, recruits, and influence, which sometimes led to open conflict that required royal or papal intervention to sort out. Things took a dramatic turn after the disastrous Battle of Hattin and the fall of Jerusalem to Saladin's forces. With the capital lost and territory reduced to a few coastal cities, political authority splintered even more. In this chaotic atmosphere, the military orders, with their independent funding and international recruitment, gained even more power compared to weakened secular rulers. Throughout all these changes, the Templars faced a real challenge, balancing their spiritual mission with the messy world of politics. They were committed to protecting Christian interests in the Holy Land, but doing that effectively meant getting involved in political maneuvering that sometimes clashed with their monastic ideals. Different Grand Masters handled this tension in various ways. Some kept their distance from political entanglements, while others dove right into the governance of Outremer. By the latter half of the 12th century, the Templars had become essential to the political survival of the Crusader states. Their castles were crucial for territorial defense. Their financial resources helped struggling royal treasuries, and their diplomatic ties facilitated external alliances. But this very importance also sparked resentment among some secular authorities who felt their power was being squeezed by Templar influence. The complicated politics of Outremer shaped the Templar order just as much as they shaped the region's politics. From their humble beginnings as road guardians, they evolved into savvy political players, balancing multiple roles: military defenders, financial power brokers, and representatives of papal interests in the East. This evolution set the stage for their rise to international prominence, while also planting the seeds of the tensions that would eventually lead to their downfall. The rule of the Templars. Imagine a small group of knights turning into a powerful international order. It wasn't just about getting a thumbs up from the Pope. It needed a whole set of rules to guide every part of their lives, from when to pray to how to act on the battlefield. Enter the Templar Rule, a groundbreaking document that mixed the discipline of monastic life with the grit of military necessity. The creation of this rule at the Council of Troyes was a game-changer for the Templars. Bernard of Clairvaux, a big name in religion back then, was a key player in putting it all together. His work in praise of the new knighthood laid the spiritual groundwork for this bold idea. In his writings, Bernard made it clear that the Templars were different from regular knights, who he criticized for being all about show and personal glory. The Templars, on the other hand, were all about protecting the innocent and standing up for Christendom. He famously said, "The knight who protects his soul with the armor of faith as he covers his body with an armor of steel is truly fearless." This strong endorsement helped silence critics who doubted that warfare and monastic life could go hand in hand. The original rule was in Latin and had 72 articles that set the spiritual and organizational foundation for the order. Over the years, it grew and evolved, adding more sections to cover specific situations and fine-tune its regulations. It laid out everything from daily prayer routines to horseback riding techniques, creating a detailed guide for Templar life. At the top of the order was the Grand Master, elected for life by a group of senior brothers. This role combined spiritual leadership with military command, needing both faith and strategy. The Grand Master led the chapter, the central governing body where big decisions were made with input from senior members. Below him were various officers with specific roles. A seneschal was the deputy leader and administrator, while the marshal took charge of military operations, training, and gear. The commander of the Kingdom of Jerusalem managed affairs in the order's spiritual homeland, and the draper oversaw clothing and equipment distribution. The treasurer handled finances, a role that got trickier as the order's wealth grew. Each regional division, called a commandery, had its own leadership structure, all reporting back to the Grand Master. This smart setup allowed the Templars to manage their vast territories effectively, even when communication was as slow as a horse could trot. While the Grand Master had the final say, regional commanders had to be given enough autonomy, especially since they might wait months for instructions from the top. Beyond the organizational hierarchy, the rule created a distinct class system within the order. Full Knight brothers, who came from noble backgrounds, made up the elite military group. Sergeant brothers from non-noble origins took on support roles in combat and handled many administrative tasks. Chaplain brothers, who were ordained priests, took care of the spiritual needs of the members. Serving brothers managed essential services like blacksmithing and cooking. This hierarchy mirrored medieval social structures, but also created a practical system where everyone knew their role. Daily life under the rule was all about discipline, balancing prayer and military duties. Brothers woke up before dawn for prayers, attended multiple religious services throughout the day, and kept quiet during the periods between their spiritual obligations. Knights trained in combat, cared for their horses and gear, and took on their assigned tasks. This rigorous routine built the disciplined force that made Templar Knights stand out on the battlefield. The religious side of the rule was heavily influenced by Cistercian practices, thanks to Bernard's impact. Mandatory attendance at canonical hours and regular prayer times kept the monastic vibe alive, even during military campaigns. When brothers were away from their communities for military duty, they had to replace missed services with recitations of the Lord's Prayer. The vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience were at the heart of a Templar's spiritual life. Unlike traditional monks, though, the order could accumulate wealth for its mission. Members had to give up all personal possessions upon joining. Knights couldn't own money or property and received standard clothing and gear from the order. Even accepting gifts without permission was a serious no-no. The vow of chastity wasn't just about avoiding sex. It also meant staying morally pure. Knights couldn't kiss any woman, not even their mothers or sisters. They weren't allowed to be alone with women, share water for hand-washing, or accept personal care when sick. These strict rules aimed to keep temptations at bay and focus on the Brotherhood's spiritual mission. Obedience was perhaps the most crucial vow for a military order. In battle, hesitation or going rogue could spell disaster for the whole unit. The rule insisted on immediate compliance with orders from superiors, creating a disciplined force that made Templar units incredibly effective in combat. This absolute obedience extended to every part of daily life, with members giving up personal freedom for the greater good. Diet, clothing, and personal appearance were all tightly regulated. Meals were mostly veggie dishes, with meat allowed only 3 times a week. Brothers ate in silence while listening to scripture readings, keeping the contemplative atmosphere of traditional monasteries, eaten while gearing up for war. Full knights wore distinctive white mantles, while sergeant brothers donned brown or black garments, all sporting the red cross after the Pope gave the thumbs up for that symbol. Personal grooming rules reflected practical military needs and spiritual significance. Regular haircuts kept long hair from blocking their view in battle, while neatly trimmed beards set them apart from fashionable secular knights who often went clean-shaven. These regulations made them easily recognizable on medieval battlefields. Discipline in the order relied on a tiered system of penalties for rule breaking. Minor offenses might lead to temporary meal restrictions or extra prayers. More serious violations could result in flogging or isolation from the community. The worst transgressions, especially those that could harm the order's reputation or mission, led to expulsion, effectively ending a knight's career and identity. The rule also covered battlefield conduct in detail, balancing strategic flexibility with ethical guidelines. Knights were instructed never to retreat unless they were outnumbered by at least 3 to 1, helping them build a fearsome reputation for standing their ground in Crusader armies. Discipline in combat formations was key. No brother could charge ahead without permission from commanders, even when victory seemed within reach. Remarkably for its time, the rule included guidelines for treating captives humanely and honoring truces with Muslim forces. While they were committed to defending Christian lands, the order recognized the need for coexistence in frontier regions. This pragmatic approach sometimes clashed with crusade leaders who wanted a more hardline stance against Muslim neighbors. As the order spread across different regions, the rule adapted to the varying conditions in Europe and the Near East. European commanderies, far from the heat of battle, focused on economic productivity and recruitment. Eastern preceptorates prioritized military readiness and defense. This flexibility allowed the order to keep its core values while adjusting to local circumstances. The Templar rule was revolutionary in medieval institutional history. By blending 2 seemingly opposite roles, monk and warrior, it created a new model that other military orders would later follow. The Hospitallers formed their own military branch with similar rules, and the Teutonic Knights adopted many organizational structures from the Templars. Beyond its practical use, the rule reflected deeper trends in medieval religious thought. Its focus on purposeful action, rather than withdrawal, mirrored broader reforms that emphasized a practical Christianity engaged with real-world issues. The Templar Knight, fighting for a righteous cause rather than personal glory, embodied an ideal of sanctified violence that helped reconcile Christian teachings with the harsh realities of medieval life. For nearly 2 centuries, this remarkable document guided one of history's most unique organizations. Its balance of spiritual discipline and military effectiveness laid the groundwork for the Templars' rise to incredible power and influence across medieval Europe and the Near East. By carefully regulating every aspect of their lives, the rule transformed individual knights into vital parts of an institutional powerhouse that would leave a lasting mark on medieval history. Rise to power. After the Templar Order got the official nod at the Council of Troyes, they exploded onto the scene, transforming from a small brotherhood into one of the mightiest forces in medieval Europe. This incredible growth happened thanks to a bunch of connected factors: smart land deals, military upgrades, royal backing, and an organization that crossed political lines. Noble families all over Europe were eager to throw their support behind the Templars with generous donations. Some were genuinely religious, while others were just looking to score some spiritual brownie points to balance out their earthly sins. A typical charter from this time might say something like, "I, Count Raymond, give to God and the Knights of the Temple the castle of Barra with all its lands and rights, for the salvation of my soul and my parents." Thousands of these gifts piled up fast, creating a huge network of Templar properties from Scotland all the way to the Mediterranean. These lands came in all shapes and sizes, reflecting the varied economies of medieval Europe. Farms brought in steady income through rents and crops, while urban buildings and bustling commercial hubs raked in consistent cash. Strategically placed castles controlled key trade routes and bolstered the Templars' military presence. Every donation, big or small, added to a growing economic foundation that fueled their mission in the Holy Land. Managing this rapidly expanding portfolio required some serious administrative know-how. Local commanderies, each led by a preceptor, operated like mini-empires focused on getting the most out of their regional holdings. A slice of all the revenue flowed eastward to support operations on the front lines, creating a steady stream of European resources to Outremer. This financial lifeline gave Templar forces in the east a significant edge over other Crusader groups that were stuck relying on hit or miss funding from far-off patrons. While they were spreading out across Europe, the Templars also set up their iconic headquarters in Paris, the Temple. This fortified complex, located near what is now Place de la République, became their hub for Western operations. Its massive stone tower housed the Order's treasury, archives, and banking operations. Kings and nobles trusted the temple with their valuables, knowing it was one of the safest places around. The Paris Temple became so central to French governance that it often hosted royal councils and acted as the treasury for the French monarchy. Over in England, their London base, known as the New Temple, served a similar purpose for English royalty. King John stashed the crown jewels there, while Henry III leaned on Templar financial expertise to manage royal accounts. All across Europe, Templar commanderies became key players in local economies and politics, turning the order from foreign visitors into vital parts of the institutional landscape. The Templars weren't just about money. Their strategic value went beyond their economic clout. Their castles were strategically placed defensive strongholds throughout Christian territories, forming a network of fortifications that complemented royal defenses in the Holy Land. Templar strongholds like Chateau Pellerin and Safed were imposing symbols of Christian military might, controlling crucial routes and serving as secure bases for operations against hostile forces. The architecture of these castles showcased advanced military engineering, borrowing ideas from Byzantine and Muslim designs. Concentric defensive rings, well-planned killing zones, and narrow arrow slits for maximum coverage showed their practical approach to defense. They even pioneered features like bent entranceways to thwart battering rams and murder holes that let defenders attack enemies who breached the outer walls. Regional differences in castle designs highlighted the order's ability to adapt to different environments. In desert areas, water conservation was a top priority, while mountain castles took advantage of natural terrain for defense. Coastal fortifications included facilities for naval support. This no-nonsense approach to military architecture, focusing on function over flash, was a hallmark of the Templar way of doing things. Their military effectiveness came not just from their strongholds, but also from clever battlefield tactics. Regular training created disciplined units capable of complex maneuvers that feudal levies struggled to achieve. Templars were pioneers in using standardized commands and signals, allowing for quick responses to changing battlefield conditions. They maintained strict formation discipline, forbidding knights from breaking ranks for personal glory, a common flaw in other Crusader forces. Their unique fighting style reflected a smart understanding of the realities of Middle Eastern battlefields. Heavy European cavalry tactics needed some tweaking to handle the lighter, more mobile forces they faced. Templar units developed hybrid strategies, blending Western shock tactics with Eastern mobility. They had specialized scouting units familiar with local terrain and trained to read subtle signs of enemy movement. Unlike many European commanders who dismissed Muslim tactics as dishonorable, Templar leaders studied and adapted effective enemy techniques when it suited them. Horse breeding was another area where the Templars excelled. They ran extensive stud farms focused on producing war horses that had the right traits for armored combat in Middle Eastern conditions. These horses needed not just size and strength, but also the ability to handle the heat and endure long battles. Templars crossbred European destriers with Arabian stock, creating mounts that were perfectly suited for their operational needs. Their expertise became so well known that European nobles came to the Templars for advice on improving their own breeding programs. The Second Crusade was a major chance for the Templars to show off their growing capabilities. When European armies under Louis VII of France and Conrad III of Germany marched east, Templar contingents provided crucial support. Their understanding of local conditions, superior logistics, and disciplined forces stood in stark contrast to the chaotic main Crusader armies. After the Crusades' failure, many blamed poor planning and leadership rather than Templar contributions, which only boosted the order's reputation. Over the following decades, the Brotherhood ramped up their military involvement in defending the Crusader states. By the mid-12th century, they had evolved from auxiliary escorts into a key part of frontline defense. Their role in the Battle of Mont Isard, where a significantly outnumbered Crusader force triumphed over Saladin's army, solidified their reputation for battlefield effectiveness. Contemporary chroniclers credited Templar discipline for keeping formation cohesion at critical moments during this unlikely victory. This military evolution was shaped by influential Grand Masters, especially André de Montbard, the fifth to hold this title. As the uncle of Bernard of Clairvaux and one of the order's founding knights, André blended spiritual authority with practical military experience. Under his leadership, the Brotherhood refined their unique mix of monastic discipline and martial effectiveness. His connections with prominent European nobles helped secure donations that significantly boosted their resources. He also established standardized training methods that turned recruits from diverse backgrounds into a unified fighting force. Unlike the haphazard training typical in feudal armies, Templar Knights underwent systematic preparation, focusing on specific skills for their unique mission. Combat techniques, horsemanship, and formation maneuvers were emphasized alongside spiritual instruction, creating warriors whose battlefield discipline was deeply rooted in their religious commitment. While the Templars' military contributions often grabbed the spotlight, their logistical innovations were just as important. The order developed sophisticated supply systems, keeping secure routes open between their Mediterranean ports and inland garrisons. They built specialized storage facilities to preserve food in the desert heat and set up relay stations to ensure fresh mounts for messengers carrying urgent information. These behind-the-scenes but essential capabilities allowed them to operate effectively in environments that often defeated other Crusader forces through attrition and supply issues. Their engineering corps became famous for rapid bridge construction, siege engine design, and water management in arid regions. When Crusader armies needed specialized equipment for specific campaigns, Templar workshops frequently provided both the expertise and materials. Their practical approach prioritized effectiveness over tradition, willingly adopting techniques from Byzantine and Muslim engineers when those offered advantages over European methods. By the latter half of the 12th century, the order had reached unprecedented heights within European society. Kings sought their military advice, nobles tried to emulate their organizational methods, and commoners looked at them with a mix of awe and mystery. Their distinctive white mantles, marked with red crosses, became recognized symbols of Christian military power from Scotland to Syria. The once humble brotherhood, created to protect pilgrims, had morphed into an international institution, wielding influence at the highest levels of medieval society. This meteoric rise came with its own set of contradictions that would eventually contribute to their downfall. The vast wealth needed to support their military mission created tension with their supposed vow of poverty. Their exemption from episcopal authority and direct accountability only to the Pope led to friction with local church hierarchies. Their international structure, which crossed political boundaries, sometimes put them at odds with emerging nation-states that were becoming more assertive about their sovereignty. But during their heyday, these contradictions were manageable through careful diplomacy and the clear value of their services. The order's pragmatic leadership usually kept enough political savvy to navigate complex relationships with various patrons. Their strict internal discipline helped minimize scandals that could tarnish their reputation, while their ongoing military contributions to defend Christendom justified their special privileges in the eyes of most contemporaries. This golden age of Templar influence would eventually face its biggest test with the catastrophic events surrounding the fall of Jerusalem to Saladin's forces. Yet even this disaster, which fundamentally changed the crusading landscape, would initially reinforce rather than diminish the order's importance. As secular forces proved inadequate to defend the Holy Land, the disciplined, well-funded military orders emerged as the most reliable line of defense against Muslim reconquest, setting the stage for the next chapter in their remarkable journey. Masters of the Mediterranean, Templar naval power. When you think of the Templar Order, you'd probably picture those armored knights on horseback, right? But guess what? Their skills in medieval warfare went way beyond just land battles. By the mid-12th century, they had built up a pretty impressive naval presence that changed the game in the Eastern Mediterranean. This whole naval side of things was just as important as their famous land battles. The geography of the Crusader states made it clear that they needed to be good at sea. Christian territories in the Levant relied heavily on maritime routes to Europe for reinforcements, supplies, and communication. If those sea connections were cut off, it could spell disaster for Outremer. Muslim naval forces knew this weakness all too well and often targeted Christian ships, while pirates lurked in hidden coves, ready to pounce on merchant vessels and pilgrims. Seeing the challenges ahead, the Templar leadership decided to step up their game and develop their own naval capabilities. They started off small, picking up a few merchant vessels to transport supplies from Europe to their eastern commanderies. At first, these ships were mainly for logistics, ferrying horses, weapons, and recruits to support their land operations. But they quickly realized that to keep things running smoothly, they needed safe sea routes, which pushed them to build dedicated war galleys. The Templars set up their main naval base at the port of Acre, where they constructed specialized facilities for maintaining and operating their vessels. Stone quays, shipyards, and warehouses formed a complex that even visitors back then said rivaled the best in Europe. They also established additional bases at Tyre, Jaffa, and several smaller harbors, creating a network of safe havens for their ships patrolling the coast. Their fleet included different types of vessels, each with a specific role. Galleys with shallow drafts were perfect for coastal patrols and chasing down pirates. Larger transport ships, known as naves, carried heavy cargo, including the war horses vital for Templar military operations. They even had specialized pilgrim ships with reinforced decks to accommodate the hundreds of travelers heading to fulfill their religious vows. At the peak of their naval power, it's said the Brotherhood had several dozen vessels operating across the Mediterranean. Running this fleet required skills that traditional knightly training didn't cover. To tackle this, the Templars created a dedicated marine branch. Templar mariners became experts in navigation, ship handling, and naval combat tactics. Command positions typically went to knights who showed a knack for maritime operations, while experienced sailors from Italian maritime republics brought in their technical know-how, enriching the Brotherhood's maritime expertise. But the Templar naval operations weren't just about transport. They had multiple strategic goals. Regular patrols along pilgrim sea routes significantly reduced pirate attacks on vulnerable ships. They also organized convoy systems that grouped merchant vessels under Templar protection, boosting commercial security and strengthening economic ties between East and West. Their naval forces provided crucial support for coastal castles, delivering supplies and reinforcements to areas that could easily be besieged. This became especially clear during the Third Crusade, when Christian forces laid siege to Acre. Templar vessels maintained a vital naval blockade, stopping Muslim relief ships from reaching the city. They transported massive siege equipment that couldn't travel overland and evacuated wounded soldiers for treatment. This multifaceted support was key to the eventual Christian recapture of this critical port city. Beyond military uses, Templar ships also played a crucial role in the broader Crusader effort. European nobles and their entourages often booked passage on Templar vessels when traveling east to fulfill their crusading vows, knowing they offered superior safety and reliable schedules. Even pilgrims with less money sought out Templar transport, willing to pay extra for the security these ships provided. The Brotherhood set up standardized fare structures and regular sailing schedules between major Mediterranean ports, creating an early version of organized passenger service. The naval skills developed for military purposes also brought in significant commercial benefits. During peaceful times, Templar ships engaged in trade, transporting valuable Eastern goods to European markets and taking Western products back east. The profits from these commercial voyages helped fund their military missions and strengthened economic connections between far-off regions. Their reputation for honest dealings and reliable delivery made Templar vessels the go-to choice for high-value cargo needing secure transport. The Brotherhood showed incredible innovation in their naval operations. Their ships blended design elements from both Western and Eastern maritime traditions, creating hybrid vessels that were just right for Mediterranean conditions. Western-style deep hulls gave them stability and cargo capacity, while Eastern-influenced lateen sails offered better maneuverability in the unpredictable winds of the Eastern Mediterranean. This practical approach to ship design perfectly matched the Templar way of adopting effective techniques no matter where they came from. Their navigational practices were a mix of traditions from various seafaring cultures. Templar mariners used astronomical navigation techniques learned from Muslim sailors alongside Western methods based on coastal landmarks and simple charts. At night, they used signal lanterns arranged in specific patterns to keep the fleet together, a system that was actually more advanced than what contemporary European navies had at the time. These technical innovations gave Templar vessels an edge that made them incredibly effective, even with a relatively small fleet. The naval aspect of Templar power significantly boosted their political standing within the Crusader states. Controlling critical maritime routes gave them leverage in negotiations with secular authorities, who were always worried about communication with Europe. When political disputes came up between European powers in the East, Templar naval neutrality often provided the only reliable transport option for diplomats heading to reconciliation talks. This maritime strength complemented their land-based military might, creating a comprehensive security capability that no secular authority in Outremer could match. This naval expertise was especially valuable during tough times when inland areas fell to Muslim forces. Coastal strongholds held by military orders became the main Christian footholds in the region. The ability to supply these positions from the sea kept them viable, even when surrounded by hostile territory. After the disastrous Battle of Hattin and the loss of Jerusalem, Templar naval capabilities were crucial in maintaining the remaining coastal fragments of the Crusader states. Of course, life at sea presented unique challenges for an order bound by monastic vows. Being on medieval ships involved hardships and dangers that land-based commanders weren't used to. Long voyages meant they had to adapt their regular prayer schedules and dietary rules. The Brotherhood came up with specialized regulations for their seafaring members, balancing spiritual obligations with the practical realities of life at sea. Ship chaplains held religious services tailored to naval conditions, keeping the order's spiritual character intact even in this specialized branch. The Templar fleet reached its peak influence in the years following the Third Crusade. With Jerusalem lost and Christian territory reduced to coastal regions, naval power became even more crucial for Outremer's survival. The Brotherhood's ships maintained essential connections between isolated Christian outposts that would have been impossible to defend otherwise. Their maritime patrols acted as a strong deterrent against Muslim naval forces, considering attacks on vulnerable coastal positions. Archaeological finds from Templar port facilities show the sophisticated infrastructure that supported their naval operations. Excavations at Acre have uncovered specialized storage for marine equipment, workshops for sail production, and slipways designed for efficient vessel maintenance. These discoveries confirm contemporary accounts of highly organized maritime activities running on standardized procedures. The significant investment in these facilities highlights just how important the order saw their naval capabilities. Though not as celebrated as their mounted knights, Templar mariners made equally vital contributions to the order's mission and reputation. Their mastery of Mediterranean seafaring extended the brotherhood's protective reach beyond land routes to include the sea lanes connecting Europe with the Holy Land. This all-encompassing approach to security, covering both land and sea, established the Templars as the essential guardians of Christian interests in the East. The maritime legacy of the Templar Order didn't just vanish when they left the Levant. When Christian territories in the Holy Land finally fell, elements of their naval expertise were passed on to other maritime powers, especially Portugal, where many Templar resources were absorbed by the successor Order of Christ. This Portuguese connection would later play a role in the Age of Exploration, with ships flying the distinctive Cross of Christ, which evolved from the Templar emblem, setting sail into the Atlantic under commanders trained in navigational techniques that traced back to Templar practices. By building effective naval capabilities alongside their famous land forces, the Brotherhood showcased an integrated approach to medieval security operations that was way ahead of its time. This comprehensive strategy, covering both domains, laid the groundwork for their rise to incredible power and influence throughout the Mediterranean world. The Banker Knights, while everyone was busy admiring the Templar Order's fighting skills, they might not have realized their biggest game-changer was actually in finance. Seriously, these guys started off just making sure pilgrims were safe on their journeys, but then they stepped up their game to protect their money too. They came up with some financial tools and banking practices that totally shook up the medieval economy and set the stage for what we see in modern finance today. So, what kicked this off? Well, medieval pilgrims had a pretty rough time beyond just worrying about getting robbed. They had to haul around a lot of cash for their trips, which made them prime targets for bandits. Carrying gold coins and other valuables made them super noticeable. Even if they managed to dodge the thieves, dealing with different currencies across regions was a real headache. The knight monks figured out a clever way to tackle these issues, changing the financial game forever. Here's how it worked. A pilgrim could stash their cash at a commandery back home and get a special document with symbols only the order's officials could understand. When they reached their destination, they'd show that document to the local folks and get their funds in the local currency, minus a small fee. This system was like the early version of letters of credit, making long-distance travel way less risky while bringing in some income for the knights. Merchants and nobles quickly saw the perks of this setup, especially as trade picked up during the High Middle Ages. Traders jumped at the chance to use this secure method for moving money without having to lug around their valuables. The Knights' banking network stretched all the way from Scotland to Cyprus, making trade on a massive scale possible and fueling a commercial revolution that transformed European economic life. Royal families caught on to how useful these services could be for running their kingdoms. Back in the day, most medieval kingdoms didn't have steady financial institutions to manage their resources. Royal treasuries were basically just strongboxes that followed the king around from castle to castle, which made things super complicated. The Templars offered a solid alternative: secure facilities run by smart administrators who knew how to keep track of money. King Louis VII of France was one of the first to see the value in this. After witnessing the financial savvy of these knight monks during the Second Crusade, he appointed one of them as royal treasurer and started keeping crown funds in their Paris headquarters. This set a trend for other kings, especially in England, where King John and later Henry III built strong financial ties with the order. By the early 13th century, the Paris Temple was practically acting as the French national treasury, with officials managing royal accounts separately from the knights' finances. The way they ran their financial operations was pretty impressive for the time. The holy warriors had standardized accounting practices across their network, using double-entry bookkeeping long before it became common in Europe. They had regular financial checks by officials from headquarters to make sure everyone was sticking to the rules, which created a level of accountability that was unheard of. Their records clearly separated the organization's funds from client deposits, a concept that would later become a key part of modern banking regulations. These crusading bankers didn't just stop at deposits. They also got into lending. Even though the church had rules against charging interest, the knights found ways to offer credit without breaking those rules. They came up with mortgage deals, adjusted exchange rates, and strategic fees to help people get the funds they needed without technically charging interest. This was especially helpful for European kings, who were always short on cash for their military campaigns. When King Louis IX got ready for his crusade, he relied on big loans from the Templars to fund his expedition. Henry III of England often turned to them for financial support, too. These lending relationships not only boosted the knights' political clout, but also brought in cash for their main missions. The physical setup for these financial operations was something to behold. The major houses of the knightly order had special treasury rooms with top-notch security. The Paris Temple had a multi-story stone tower with walls thick enough to keep out intruders, accessible only through a single fortified entrance, guarded day and night by the warrior monks. Inside, they had iron-bound chests organized by region, holding meticulously documented valuables and financial records. These facilities were the safest places to store wealth in medieval Europe, attracting deposits from those looking for the best protection for their money. But it wasn't just about physical security. The Knights' financial network had other perks, too. Their members were literate at a time when that wasn't common, so they kept detailed records. Their international structure made it easy to transfer money between regions with different currencies and financial systems. Plus, their religious status gave people peace of mind that they were dealing with honest operators, unlike some secular moneylenders. This mix of benefits made their services appealing even to Jewish and Muslim merchants, who were usually wary of Christian institutions. As their financial operations expanded, they reached some pretty impressive heights. When French officials eventually took over the Paris headquarters, it took them weeks to go through everything, uncovering huge deposits from nobles, merchants, religious institutions, and foreign dignitaries, alongside royal treasures. Archaeological digs at their sites have found specialized scales for weighing coins, seal matrices for authenticating documents, and accounting tokens for complex calculations, clear signs of their advanced financial operations. The banking functions of these warrior monks also included asset management services that today we'd think of as trust and investment activities. Nobles going off on crusades often put their entire estates in the hands of the knights. The brothers would manage farms, collect rents, handle tenant disputes, and send the money either to the owner in the East or to family members back in Europe. This required a lot of administrative know-how, including legal expertise on property rights in different areas. But not everyone was thrilled about their financial success. Some religious traditionalists questioned whether a monastic group should be so involved in worldly finance. Secular moneylenders were unhappy about the competition for an organization that didn't have to pay taxes or follow many regulations. Jewish financial operators, who had been the go-to lenders in Europe, found their roles shrinking as Christian rulers started favoring the Knights' services. The military order defended their financial activities by saying they were just extensions of their mission to protect people. Just like their swords kept pilgrims safe, their financial tools helped travelers secure their economic well-being. The money they made from these services supported their military efforts to defend Christian territories in the East. This practical reasoning satisfied most people back then, even though there were ongoing debates within the order about the balance between their spiritual goals and commercial activities. The sophisticated financial practices developed by these Knight monks raised some interesting questions about where they came from. Some scholars think they might have drawn inspiration from Islamic financial systems they encountered during their Eastern missions. Muslim merchants had created various credit tools that worked around their rules against interest, which could have served as models for the Christian order. Byzantine practices might have also influenced them, especially regarding the documents used for trade. The Knights' practical approach to problems made them open to adopting effective methods, no matter where they came from. Their financial innovations really changed the game for international trade. Before the Templars came along, merchants trying to trade over long distances faced huge obstacles. Converting currencies, keeping their money safe during travel, and getting credit in far-off markets. The Knights International Network broke down those barriers, making it much easier to do business across previously impossible distances. This boost to trade played a big role in the commercial revival that transformed European economic life during the High Middle Ages. By the late 13th century, the military brotherhood had built what was basically an international banking network covering much of the known Christian world, from England to Cyprus, from Scandinavia to Sicily. Their commanderies offered standardized financial services to everyone from everyday pilgrims to kings. This financial system was an unprecedented achievement in medieval Europe, unmatched until Italian banking houses rose to prominence centuries later. But then came the downfall. The fate of this financial empire became tied to the larger collapse of the Knight monks. Their role as creditors to the French crown, especially the massive debts owed by Philip IV, played a huge part in the reasons behind their suppression. The dramatic scene of armed knights storming the Paris Temple in October 1307 wasn't just an attack on a religious order. It was a seizure of what had become a national financial institution. The legacy of the financial innovations from this military religious order lasted long after they were gone. The banking methods they created continued through later institutions, especially the Italian banks that filled the gap left by their downfall. Ideas like documentary credit, international transfers, trust services, and secure deposits pioneered by the Templars became standard in European finance. Their practical solutions to medieval commercial challenges laid the groundwork for banking practices we still recognize today. The journey from warrior monks protecting travelers on dangerous roads to international bankers revolutionizing finance is one of history's most remarkable transformations. They didn't just master the sword. They became experts in financial tools that reshaped the medieval economy. Templar economics, revolutionizing medieval finance. Imagine the medieval world bustling with activity and change. The financial innovations we've talked about are just one piece of the puzzle. When it comes to the incredible economic impact of the warrior monks, these holy brothers didn't just dabble in banking. They created a whole economic system that stretched far beyond that. They were involved in everything from managing farms and industrial production to commercial transport and even early economic statecraft. This all-in-one approach turned their resources into a self-sustaining engine that fueled their military and political actions across 2 continents. At the heart of their economic empire were huge agricultural estates donated by supporters from all over Europe. Unlike other monastic orders that worked their lands directly with lay brothers, the military order used a manorial tenant system. Local farmers worked the land under standardized leases that laid out rents, service obligations, and production arrangements. This smart setup kept personnel needs low while still bringing in steady income through cash rents, crop shares, and service commutations. They really knew how to make their agricultural operations efficient. The Knight monks were pioneers of crop rotation systems that kept the soil fertile. They built impressive water management systems, like irrigation channels in the Mediterranean and drainage systems in northern Europe that boosted the productivity of their lands. They also managed forests carefully to ensure a sustainable supply of timber for building and ship construction. Thanks to all this, their agricultural productivity was way above the medieval norm. Livestock management was another area where these crusading brothers excelled. They kept large flocks of sheep throughout their European territories, producing wool that entered international markets. Their horse breeding operations met both military needs and civilian demand, with their prized destriers fetching top dollar from European nobility. In Iberia, where they held extensive frontier territories, their cattle ranching techniques laid the groundwork for practices later seen in colonial American ranching, but they didn't stop at primary production. The order set up specialized industrial facilities to turn raw agricultural products into higher value goods. Water-powered mills ground grain, pressed oil, and fulled wool cloth. Wineries turned grapes from their vineyards into wines that were traded all over Europe. They also had workshops for producing leather goods, ironwork, and textiles. This added value not only boosted their agricultural base, but also reduced their reliance on outside suppliers for essential materials. Managing all these operations required some serious administrative know-how, which was pretty rare in medieval times. The knightly order developed standardized accounting methods that they applied consistently across their vast holdings. Regular inventories kept track of assets and production output, and annual financial reports flowed from local commanderies to regional centers and all the way up to headquarters. This level of organization gave them a clear view of their operations across their international network, allowing for smart resource allocation decisions that were unheard of in typical medieval economic units. Their regional economic specialization was a stroke of genius. The Holy Brotherhood recognized the unique strengths of different areas and encouraged the production of goods that suited local conditions. Wool from English estates, olive oil from Mediterranean lands, grain from Central Europe, and timber from the mountains. All these products fed into their internal distribution system, connecting complementary production zones. This proto-industrial approach to regional specialization was ahead of its time, anticipating economic principles that wouldn't be formally recognized until centuries later. Their economic influence didn't just stop in the countryside. It extended into urban areas too. Houses of the military religious order in major cities often controlled surrounding districts filled with workshops, commercial buildings, and residential properties, generating rental income. In London, the new temple complex included extensive commercial properties along Fleet Street, while the Paris Temple controlled a significant amount of urban real estate beyond its well-known headquarters. These urban holdings brought in income and gave them strategic advantages in important commercial and political centers. Commercial transportation was another crucial piece of their economic puzzle. Beyond their naval operations, the Knight brothers maintained a vast overland transportation network connecting their properties. They set up standardized way stations that provided secure overnight facilities for their transport convoys. Their pack animals and wagons didn't just carry their own goods. They also transported commercial freight for paying customers, creating an early form of common carrier service. The security offered by armed escorts made their transportation services especially valuable for high-value cargo. The way they integrated all these diverse economic activities, primary production, processing, transportation, and financial services, created some remarkable efficiencies. Grain from farms managed by the warrior monks could be processed at their mills, transported on their wagons to their ships, shipped to distant markets, and sold through transactions financed by their banking services. This vertical integration kept transaction costs low and minimized their reliance on outside sources, all while maximizing returns from each economic activity. To support their extensive operations, they needed a lot of labor beyond just their sworn brothers. A complex hierarchy of associated personnel helped keep things running smoothly. Tenant farmers worked the land, wage laborers toiled in their workshops, specialized craftsmen maintained their equipment, and clerical staff managed records. These networks created employment ecosystems that reached far beyond formal membership, amplifying their economic impact throughout medieval society. The religious warriors had a unique approach to labor management, balancing their spiritual values with practical needs. Their wage rates often exceeded local standards, attracting skilled workers and keeping turnover low. They even had work regulations that specified safety practices and quality standards, which were pretty unusual for the time, while still maintaining clear distinctions between brothers and lay employees. They genuinely seemed to care more about worker welfare than most medieval employers, reflecting their religious principles in their economic relationships. Frontier economic development was another specialized skill in their toolkit. In contested regions like Iberia and Eastern Europe, the order received large grants of undeveloped territories, which required significant investment before they could start seeing returns. They were experts at transforming these frontier zones into productive areas through systematic infrastructure development, clearing forests, building mills, establishing settlements, and constructing defensive works that allowed for agricultural colonization. This expertise made them particularly valuable to rulers looking to consolidate control over newly acquired lands. The relationship between their European properties and operations in the East showed off their sophisticated resource allocation strategies. European commanderies partly functioned as economic support bases for frontline activities in the Holy Land. A standardized percentage of revenues from Europe flowed eastward, providing consistent financial backing, no matter what political conditions were affecting traditional Crusade funding. This reliable resource pipeline gave the Holy Brotherhood significant operational advantages over other Crusade participants, who often relied on sporadic funding from distant patrons. Their economic operations proved to be remarkably resilient during times of political upheaval. When military setbacks in the East disrupted normal activities, the knightly order could reroute resources through alternative channels within their network. This adaptability was especially valuable after the loss of Jerusalem, when their economic infrastructure kept running smoothly despite major territorial changes. The decentralized nature of their operations made them less vulnerable to localized disruptions and more centralized medieval institutions. The economic power they generated through these integrated systems naturally attracted political attention. Kings recognized the strategic value of an institution capable of quickly mobilizing substantial resources across borders. The French monarchy, in particular, became heavily reliant on the economic capabilities of the warrior bankers, using their administrative systems to collect taxes, their facilities to store royal valuables, and their financial expertise to manage crown finances. This entanglement with secular governance created vulnerabilities that would eventually contribute to their downfall. Documentary evidence shows they had a sophisticated understanding of monetary principles that was quite unusual for their time. Financial administrators within the Brotherhood demonstrated a solid grasp of exchange rate mechanisms, depreciation effects, and capital preservation strategies. Their international operations exposed them to various currency systems and their relative stabilities, which informed their treasury management practices and client advice during periods of currency manipulation by royal authorities. Archaeological digs at sites used by the military order have uncovered physical evidence of their economic sophistication. Excavated storage facilities reveal standardized inventory management systems, while workshop remains show production line setups that maximized efficiency. Agricultural installations demonstrate advanced water management technologies that boosted land productivity. These physical remnants confirm the contemporary documentary evidence of their systematic approach to economic organization. The economic impact of their activities went well beyond their own institution. Regional markets sprang up around the commercial centers established by the crusading knights, and transportation routes improved to support their trading activities. Banking practices pioneered in their counting houses eventually spread to secular commercial operations. Their economic innovations influenced developments far beyond their direct reach, sparking broader economic growth throughout medieval Europe. Their practices reflected a practical adaptation rather than theoretical innovation. The religious warriors didn't seem too interested in economic philosophy. They were much more focused on getting things done effectively. When existing methods fell short of their operational needs, they quickly developed new approaches based on what worked in real life, rather than waiting for some theoretical justification. While historians have often focused more on the military exploits of the night monks, their economic activities arguably left a more lasting legacy. Long after their distinctive white mantles disappeared from battlefields, the economic practices they pioneered continued to shape European commercial development, from banking procedures to estate management techniques, and from transportation systems to workshop organization. Their practical solutions to medieval economic challenges set the stage for future institutional evolution. The Brotherhood's economic achievements showcase that their organizational genius extended far beyond the battlefield. The same systematic approach that made their military units so effective in combat also enabled unprecedented economic coordination across vast distances. Their unique blend of spiritual values with economic activities created a distinctive organizational culture that could sustain complex operations while maintaining their essential religious character. This remarkable ability to turn abstract principles into functional systems across multiple domains stands out as one of their greatest institutional achievements. Daily life of a Templar. Behind the grand stories of battles and banking lies the everyday reality of the knights in the Holy Order. men who dedicated their lives to a unique mix of monastic discipline and military service. Their daily experiences were quite different from those of traditional monks or secular knights, blending elements from both lifestyles into a way of life that shaped everything they did from dawn till dusk. One of the most noticeable things about these warrior monks was their appearance. Full members wore the iconic white mantle, symbolizing purity, proudly marked with a red cross, which was authorized by the Pope early in their history. Underneath this famous garment, their clothing was simple and practical. Wool tunics, linen undergarments, and sturdy leather boots, all designed for functionality rather than show. Unlike the colorful outfits of secular knights, who flaunted personalized heraldry, the brothers of the order maintained a uniform look, emphasizing their collective identity over individual flair. This uniformity extended to their grooming, too. The rules specified haircuts short enough to fit comfortably under helmets, and beards that were neatly trimmed but never completely shaved, unlike the secular style. These regulations served practical military purposes and had spiritual significance, visually setting the brothers apart from worldly knights who were more concerned with fashion. From a distance, a group of these military religious brothers presented a strikingly recognizable and somewhat intimidating uniformity. Daily life followed a strict schedule, blending religious practices with military duties. The brothers would rise before dawn to the sound of a bell, calling them to matins, the first prayer of the day. After these early prayers, they attended Mass before breaking their overnight fast with a simple breakfast. The rest of the morning was typically spent on military training and maintaining their gear, with knights practicing formation riding, handling weapons, and mastering battlefield communications. Midday brought them back to the chapel for prayers, followed by the main meal of the day. Dining in the communal refectory, their meals followed monastic traditions adapted for their military needs. They ate in silence while listening to scripture readings, seated according to rank along long tables. Unlike traditional monasteries, which mostly had vegetarian diets, the rule allowed meat 3 days a week, acknowledging the physical demands of their military duties. Portions were moderate, but enough to keep their strength up. Afternoon activities varied depending on their location and specific assignments. Brothers stationed at frontier outposts might conduct reconnaissance patrols or escort travelers through dangerous areas. Those at major commanderies could oversee farming operations, train new recruits, or maintain defensive structures. Others handled administrative tasks like managing finances, corresponding with distant leaders, or keeping track of supplies. The integrated nature of their operations meant that knights often rotated through different responsibilities during their service. As evening approached, the brothers gathered again for Vespers prayers before a light supper. After Compline, the final prayer of the day, they observed strict silence until morning. Knights retired to dormitory accommodations, reflecting their monastic vows, simple rope beds with straw mattresses and communal sleeping halls instead of private rooms. Personal belongings were minimal, usually limited to clothing, devotional items, and military gear issued by the order rather than owned personally. This daily rhythm varied somewhat between locations. Brothers serving in the East faced different challenges than those stationed in Europe. Frontier outposts required heightened vigilance, with knights sleeping fully clothed and ready to respond to alarms. Coastal installations worked alongside naval operations, while agricultural commanderies adjusted their schedules to fit seasonal farming needs. Despite these differences, the basic pattern of alternating prayer and service remained consistent across the territories held by the knightly order. The monastic aspect of life in the warrior brotherhood extended beyond scheduled prayers to include comprehensive spiritual practices. Personal devotions, regular confessions, and spiritual guidance from chaplain brothers were essential parts of their daily experience. The rules encouraged silent contemplation during routine activities, turning everyday tasks into chances for spiritual reflection. Even military training had a religious element, with weapons practice often preceded by prayers, dedicating their skills to righteous defense rather than personal glory. Military training was central to their daily activities, with methods far more organized than typical feudal practices. New recruits went through standardized training, gradually building combat skills from basic horse riding to complex unit maneuvers. Experienced knights regularly practiced formation riding, weapon handling, and tactical communications to stay ready for action. Unlike secular knights, who might train sporadically between hunting trips and court appearances, the brothers of the military order engaged in daily martial practice as a core part of their vocation. Equipment maintenance was another regular duty. The rules emphasized meticulous care for horses, weapons, and armor not as personal property, but as a sacred trust enabling their protective mission. Brothers spent considerable time inspecting gear for damage, cleaning metal parts to prevent rust, and ensuring their mounts received proper care. This systematic approach to maintenance significantly boosted the battlefield effectiveness of the Holy Knights, with warriors entering combat equipped with gear held to higher standards. Communal life within the religious order balanced military hierarchy with monastic equality. While clear rank distinctions organized their activities, the rules established practices emphasizing spiritual brotherhood, regardless of status. All members shared the same food, wore similar clothing with rank indicators, and participated in the same prayer obligations. This balance created a unique community, combining a disciplined chain of command for military effectiveness with spiritual equality before God. Communication within this community followed structured patterns. During meals and after evening prayers, strict silence was maintained in line with monastic tradition. Working hours allowed necessary communication for operations, but discouraged idle chatter. Chapter meetings provided formal opportunities to address community concerns, with brothers speaking in turn according to rank and seniority. This controlled communication environment helped reduce conflicts while ensuring coordination for complex operations. Interactions with the world outside the military brotherhood were also carefully regulated. The rules restricted casual contact with outsiders, especially women, who were completely barred from the order's houses. When external duties required interaction with the secular world, brothers usually traveled in pairs to ensure mutual accountability. These restrictions aimed to maintain moral discipline and operational security in an environment where the order's growing wealth attracted constant attention. Entertainment and leisure, as understood in secular society, had little place in the lives of these warrior monks. The rules explicitly prohibited hunting for sport, attending tournaments as spectators, and participating in secular celebrations. Physical recreation took practical forms, like swimming for horse exercise or targeted games to develop combat skills. Leisure reading was limited to religious texts and operational materials, rather than the popular chivalric literature enjoyed by secular knights. These restrictions reinforced a separation from worldly values while keeping the focus on their spiritual military mission. Discipline within this structured community relied on graduated consequences for infractions. Minor violations, like speaking during designated silence or neglecting equipment maintenance, typically resulted in extra prayers or reduced food rations. More serious offenses, such as insubordination or leaving an installation without commission, could lead to corporal punishment or periods of isolation. The most severe violations, especially those threatening the order's reputation or mission, could result in expulsion, effectively ending a knight's career and identity. Personal stories from the brothers of the religious knighthood give us a real peek into their daily lives beyond the formal rules. Take Brother Farang's letter to his family, for example. He shares how he moved from a life of idle hunts and flashy displays to one filled with purpose through prayer and protecting those who can't defend themselves. He notes, "Though my bed is harder and my meals plainer, my soul finds a rest unknown in my former life." This shows that many brothers found real meaning in the order's discipline, feeling it offered a structure that was more supportive than restrictive. Daily life for these brothers varied a lot depending on their specific roles within the vast operations of the crusading brotherhood. For instance, a brother assigned to escort duties along pilgrim routes might spend weeks traveling between secure houses, always on the lookout for ambushes. Meanwhile, another brother focused on financial tasks could be busy managing complex transactions involving different currencies. A knight stationed at a frontier castle might juggle supervising construction, handling local diplomacy, and going on patrols. This mix of responsibilities offered brothers a range of experiences while still sticking to the disciplined framework of the Holy Order. Another cool aspect of their daily life was the international vibe among the knight monks. They often interacted with brothers from various European backgrounds. Imagine a French knight working side by side with Spanish, English, and German brothers, creating a multilingual community that was pretty rare for that time. While Latin was the go-to language for religious services and official matters, everyday operations required everyone to get a bit multilingual. This international setting opened up new perspectives, with brothers sharing different military techniques, administrative practices, and practical know-how. Medical care was another important part of their daily routine. The Brotherhood had infirmaries staffed by brothers trained in medicine, providing care that was way better than what secular knights usually received. They put a strong emphasis on preventive health practices, with rules about hygiene, water quality, and wearing the right clothes for different climates. These practical health measures were crucial for keeping everyone operational, especially in tough environments like the East, where European forces often faced unfamiliar diseases. The seasons also brought some changes to their daily patterns. Major religious festivals like Easter and Christmas meant more elaborate liturgical celebrations and special feasts allowed by their rules. Agricultural commanderies adjusted their activities to fit the planting and harvest seasons. During the winter months in northern regions, they focused on indoor tasks like repairing equipment, organizing archives, and holding training sessions for specialized skills. These seasonal shifts helped keep everyone busy year-round while respecting the limits of their environment. The psychological side of daily life for the brothers was perhaps the most unique part of their experience. They lived with a kind of cognitive dissonance, balancing monastic schedules that aimed for spiritual peace while also training for violent combat. They took vows of personal poverty, but were in charge of managing significant wealth as a group. They spent almost all their time among men, yet their order was dedicated to the Virgin Mary. Navigating these contradictions required a mental flexibility that set these warrior monks apart from traditional monks and secular knights. For newcomers, Adjusting to this distinctive lifestyle could be tough. The order had a structured initiation process to help ease novices into the ways of the religious knights. Senior brothers acted as mentors during this transition, sharing insights from their own experiences of balancing seemingly contradictory demands. Historical records show that some recruits dropped out, finding the order's expectations too challenging, while others discovered a deep sense of purpose that had been missing in their former lives as secular knights. Throughout their history, the lived experiences of individual knights in the warrior brotherhood remained pretty consistent, even as the order evolved. Whether they were serving during the humble beginnings or at the peak of the order's power, the brothers generally followed the same daily routines laid out in their original rules. This consistency helped create a sense of intergenerational solidarity, which was pretty rare in medieval institutions. Knights separated by decades felt a deep kinship through their shared daily practices. Even as the organization grew into banking and land management, the core experience of balancing prayer with protection stayed the defining aspect of life in the sacred brotherhood. This unique blend of monastic discipline and military service shaped a distinct vocational identity that was different from both traditional monks and knights. They weren't quite either. Instead, the brothers of the order occupied a third category, going beyond the usual medieval social classifications. Their daily practices reflected this hybrid identity, merging quiet contemplation with battlefield communication, simple living with military effectiveness, and personal humility with collective strength. This daily reality, more than any grand historical events, truly defined what it meant to be a member of this extraordinary military religious order. Battles and crusades, the Templar order was way more than just your average escort service or castle guards. These warrior monks were involved in nearly every major campaign aimed at defending or expanding Christian territories in the East. Their disciplined fighting style, top-notch gear, and fearless attitude made them crucial players in Crusader armies that often struggled with inconsistent quality and divided leadership. From epic victories to heartbreaking defeats, these fighting brothers were front and center in the most important battles of the Crusader era. Their reputation on the battlefield skyrocketed after they focused on securing roads. By the 1130s, just 10 years after getting the official nod, they were showing up in major field operations alongside royal forces. The siege of Ashkelon in 1153 was a big moment for them, marking their first major role in a large-scale fight. This coastal city had been a Muslim stronghold, launching raids into Christian lands. Under Grand Master Bernard de Molay, the knights led several attacks against its tough defenses. There was a pivotal moment when a section of the wall came crashing down during the bombardment, creating a chance for a breakthrough. The knights rushed in to take advantage, with the Grand Master reportedly among the first to charge through. What happened next sparked some debate. Some accounts say Bernard and his knights went in alone, driven by a desire for loot, while others from the order argue they aimed to secure a defensive position for the main army to follow. No matter the reason, the small group found themselves cut off and overwhelmed by defenders. Sadly, the Grand Master and about 40 knights lost their lives in the chaos, their bodies only retrieved when the city eventually fell days later. Even with this setback, the Brotherhood's military role kept growing in the years that followed. Their disciplined forces were especially handy in countering the rising power of Nur al-Din, the Muslim leader who unified previously divided regions across Syria and northern Mesopotamia. The Templars' castles became key defensive positions, slowing down his westward push, while their mobile units engaged in skirmishes and raids along contested borders. The Battle of Montgisard in 1177 stands out as perhaps the most celebrated moment for these religious knights. When Saladin launched an invasion with an estimated 26,000 men, King Baldwin IV, the teenage leper king of Jerusalem, could only rally a few hundred knights and a couple thousand infantry. Among this outnumbered force were about 80 knights from the order, led by Odo de Saint Amand, the Grand Master at the time. Contemporary accounts tell of Baldwin's bold decision to go for a surprise attack instead of waiting for reinforcements, with the Templar Knights forming the heavy cavalry spearhead. What happened next left everyone stunned. The Christian force managed to catch Saladin's troops completely off guard, charging right into their unprepared ranks. The disciplined attack broke through Egyptian formations, causing panic to ripple through the larger Muslim army. By the end of the day, Saladin's forces had crumbled, suffering massive losses during their retreat across the desert. Christian chroniclers credited this unlikely victory partly to divine intervention, but highlighted the critical role played by the Templars' fighting skills and leadership. However, this victory was short-lived as the balance of power continued to shift toward the Muslim forces, now united under Saladin. The Brotherhood faced heavy losses in the years that followed, including the capture of Grand Master Odo de Saint Amand after a defeat at Margioun. Unlike typical noble captives who could expect ransom, Templar knights refused exchange deals, believing it was their duty to fight to victory or death. This stance reflected both their deep religious commitment and practical concerns about encouraging the capture of brothers in combat instead of their outright killing. The most devastating defeat for Christian forces, including a significant number of warrior monks, happened at the Horns of Hattin in July 1187. This pivotal battle stemmed from some poor choices made by Guy of Lusignan, who had just taken the throne of Jerusalem. Ignoring the advice of experienced crusading knights, Guy led his army across dry, waterless terrain in the sweltering summer heat, giving Saladin the upper hand in choosing the battlefield. While the fighting brothers warned against this risky move, they ultimately followed the king's orders. As the Crusader army suffered from exhaustion and thirst, the military order and hospitaller knights formed the rear guard to protect the army's vulnerable sides. When the battle finally kicked off, these military orders launched desperate charges to try to break free from the encirclement. Contemporary accounts tell of waves of knights in their white mantles charging repeatedly against the Muslim lines, even as the main Crusader army crumbled around them. By the end of the day, nearly all the holy warriors present were either killed or captured. The aftermath was even worse. Unlike secular knights, who might have had ransom options, captured members of the religious brotherhood faced immediate execution. Saladin personally oversaw the beheading of about 200 knights from both military orders, viewing them as the most dangerous foes in the Crusader ranks. This targeted elimination of experienced brothers was a devastating blow to Christian military strength in the region. Within just a few months, Jerusalem fell to Saladin's forces, effectively ending the First Crusader kingdom. Ironically, this disaster made the order even more important in the remaining Christian territories. With secular forces decimated and many nobles captured, the military orders, thanks to their independent funding and international recruitment, became the main defense for the surviving coastal cities. The castles of the warrior monks became critical strongholds as Saladin's forces swept through the once Christian lands. Their naval capabilities were vital for maintaining supply lines to isolated outposts that would have been impossible to defend otherwise. The Third Crusade, launched in response to the fall of Jerusalem, opened new doors for military contributions from the knightly brotherhood. As Richard the Lionheart's forces moved down the Palestinian coast, units from the Holy Order acted as both combat troops and cultural interpreters for European commanders unfamiliar with local conditions. The Brotherhood provided specialized reconnaissance, guides who knew the tricky terrain, and advice on Muslim fighting tactics. Richard often placed units from the religious warriors at key points in his battle formations, recognizing their superior discipline and knowledge of regional warfare. During this campaign, the Fighting Brothers showed their worth beyond just combat. Their financial network helped keep Richard's army funded after his treasury ran dry. Their language skills allowed for negotiations with Muslim forces when needed. Their castles served as secure bases for launching campaign operations. This multifaceted support was crucial for Crusader successes, even if those successes were limited in restoring Christian territories. The relationship between the military religious order and other Crusader forces was often a mix of tension and cooperation. Their strict battlefield discipline stood in stark contrast to the individualistic nature of many secular knights who are more focused on personal glory. The cautious approach of the Brotherhood, shaped by their permanent presence in the region, sometimes clashed with the aggressive tactics of European nobles eager for quick victories before heading home. These tensions occasionally boiled over into open conflict, such as when Grand Master Gerard de Rydford disagreed with other Crusader leaders over tactical decisions. Gerard himself was a complex figure, showcasing both the strengths and weaknesses of leadership within the Holy Brotherhood during this critical time. His bravery was legendary. Accounts describe him charging into seemingly hopeless situations and somehow emerging unscathed while those around him fell. However, his strategic judgment was questionable at times, especially before Hattin, when he reportedly pushed the king toward that disastrous confrontation with Saladin's forces. His mixed legacy highlights the challenges military leaders faced in balancing aggressive action with strategic caution. The Fourth Crusade never made it to the Holy Land, instead diverting to Constantinople, which had disastrous effects on Byzantine-Western relations. The involvement of the Knight monks in this controversial campaign was minimal, as most brothers continued to focus on defending the remaining Outremer territories. This decision reflected their practical commitment to their core mission rather than getting tangled in political disputes. While European attention shifted elsewhere, the Fighting Brothers stayed vigilant along increasingly threatened frontiers. Later crusading efforts yielded diminishing returns, even with the continued participation of the religious knights. The Fifth Crusade, which targeted Egypt, initially saw some success, capturing the port of Damietta, with the military order playing important supporting roles. However, strategic overreach ultimately led to defeat in the Nile Delta, nearly wiping out the entire Crusader army during a chaotic retreat. Throughout this campaign, the Brotherhood contributed specialized units, while trying, often unsuccessfully, to rein in the unrealistic ambitions of Crusade leaders who didn't understand the regional dynamics. The Sixth Crusade, led by Emperor Frederick II, managed to temporarily restore Jerusalem through negotiation instead of combat, creating awkward diplomatic compromises for military orders committed to more absolute stances. The leadership of the warrior brotherhood kept a skeptical distance from these arrangements, correctly predicting their fragility when Jerusalem fell back into Muslim hands a decade later. Their caution proved justified, though it created political tensions with imperial supporters. Throughout the ups and downs of the Crusader era, The Templar Order kept a steady military presence. While other forces came and went, they held on to strategic castles year-round, not just when battles were on. Their naval patrols kept sea lanes safe, linking coastal outposts, and their intelligence networks kept an eye on Muslim military movements, even during quieter times. This constant vigilance was key, providing much-needed continuity as Western powers shifted their focus on the Holy Land. As the conflict dragged on, relationships with Muslim adversaries changed quite a bit. The leaders of the Templar Knights, committed to defending Christian lands, developed a deeper understanding of their opponents' motivations and strengths. Unlike the newer European nobles, who often saw Muslims in a one-dimensional light, the brothers who lived in the region recognized the complex political landscape within the Islamic world and adapted their strategies accordingly. This practical mindset sometimes meant engaging in diplomacy and negotiating with certain Muslim rulers when the situation called for it. One legendary figure from the order, Gerard de Rydfort, truly embodied the Brotherhood's fighting spirit during tough times. Rising to Grand Master from humble beginnings, his bravery inspired many, even if his strategic choices were sometimes questionable. After the disaster at Hattin, he was captured during the siege of Acre, but was later released, an unusual break from Saladin's usual treatment of prisoners from the order. His death in later battles only added to his reputation for unwavering commitment to the Templar mission. Whether seen as a hero or a warning about valor without wisdom, his story highlighted both the remarkable fighting skills and the challenges of military leadership within the order. As the 13th century rolled on, changing military tech and tactics called for some serious adaptation. Originally built around heavy cavalry, the Brotherhood began to include crossbowmen, siege engineers, and light cavalry scouts to support their traditional knights. Their castles were redesigned to counter improved Muslim siege tactics, adding concentric defenses, specialized arrow slits for crossbows, and more advanced defensive setups. This willingness to change rather than just stick to old ways set the Templar Knights apart from more traditional military forces. The Templars' last major military contribution focused on defending Acre, the final significant Christian stronghold in the Holy Land. As Muslim forces led by Sultan al-Ashraf Halil completed their reconquest of remaining Crusader territories, the Knights became a vital part of Acre's defenses. When the walls of Acre were finally breached in May 1291, accounts described the fighting brothers as among the last organized defenders. Their fortress held out briefly after the city fell, allowing some civilians to escape before the structure crumbled under the assault. The Grand Master, Guillaume de Beaujeu, died leading a counterattack during the final push, showcasing their dedication to fight rather than surrender. After Acre fell, the remaining forces of the Templar Order set up temporary headquarters on Cyprus, launching occasional raids to keep some military presence along the Syrian coast. They established a small garrison at Ruad, just off the Syrian mainland, which became their last foothold near the Holy Land. When this final outpost fell to a determined Mamluk assault in 1303, the entire garrison of warrior monks was executed after capture, marking the end of their original mission. Over nearly 2 centuries of military operations, the Templar Order built a reputation for disciplined effectiveness that was unmatched by other Crusader forces. Their unique blend of religious motivation and professional military skills created fighting units that were recognized as exceptional by both sides. From victorious moments like Montgisard to heroic last stands at Acre, their contributions represented the most sustained Western military commitment to the Crusader cause. Long after politically driven crusades faded away, the Fighting Brothers stood guard over Christian territories until their final outposts became impossible to defend. Decline of the Crusader states, the fall of Acre in 1291, marked the end of the Crusader states' 2-century presence in the Holy Land. This devastating loss was the result of a long decline that changed the Templar Order's mission and ultimately led to their downfall. To understand this decline, we need to look at how shifting European priorities, a strong Muslim resurgence, and divisions among Christians gradually chipped away at what once seemed like a lasting Western presence in the East. The seeds of this decline were sown years earlier, even during times when the Crusaders appeared to be successful. After the Third Crusade, Christian territories shrank to a narrow coastal strip, lacking the farmland needed for economic independence. This setup made them permanently vulnerable, with key settlements exposed to attacks from all sides. Unlike the earlier, more defensible Kingdom of Jerusalem, these scattered coastal holdings needed constant vigilance against enemies who controlled the surrounding areas. By the 13th century, enthusiasm for the crusading effort noticeably faded in Europe. The initial religious passion that fueled the First Crusade was replaced by more cynical political motives. Papal calls for new expeditions were met with skepticism from European monarchs, who were more focused on strengthening their own power. When crusades did happen, they often veered off course, like when the Fourth Crusade ended up sacking Constantinople instead of heading to the Holy Land. This shift in perspective led to a reduced willingness to invest significant resources in Eastern ventures. Earlier crusades had drawn in the continent's most powerful figures, emperors, kings, and top nobles, while later efforts attracted less impressive leadership and smaller forces. Louis IX of France was a notable exception, leading 2 major crusades, but his efforts only highlighted the general disengagement of his royal peers. For the military brotherhood, this growing disinterest in Europe created serious strategic challenges. Their operational model relied on continuous recruitment and resource transfers from Western bases to the Eastern front lines. As European attention drifted elsewhere, it became harder to maintain enough forces at the frontier. Even with their independent financial resources, the Fighting Brothers found themselves taking on more defensive responsibilities while receiving less support from outside. At the same time, political changes in the Islamic world reshaped the strategic landscape. The rise of the Mamluk Sultanate in Egypt introduced a powerful new enemy for the remaining Crusader territories. Unlike previous Muslim powers, which were often divided by internal conflicts, the Mamluks achieved relative unity under strong military leadership. Their system of professional slave soldiers created disciplined forces specifically trained to fight Crusaders. Under Sultan Baybars, who ruled from 1260 to 1277, Mamluk forces launched systematic campaigns against Crusader holdings. Each attack was carefully planned, targeting the most vulnerable Christian positions. The brutal efficiency of these operations was a reflection of Baybar's personal experience against Crusader armies and his deep understanding of their weaknesses. His forces systematically took down castles that were once thought to be impregnable, including the mighty Safed and Beaufort fortresses. The disastrous Battle of La Fourby in 1244 foreshadowed the impending collapse. This devastating defeat, sometimes referred to as the Second Hattin, saw the military orders suffer massive casualties while trying to fend off an Egyptian invasion. The Grand Master of the religious knights, Armand de Périgord, vanished in the chaos. likely killed or captured, along with hundreds of his fellow knights. This military disaster severely weakened their defensive capabilities, just as stronger Muslim leadership was rising. Internal divisions among Christian factions further weakened their ability to resist these growing threats. Rivalries between Italian maritime republics like Genoa, Venice, and Pisa often erupted into open conflict within Crusader ports. The resulting War of St. Sabas in Acre during the 1250s pitted Christians against each other in street battles, so intense that Muslim observers were reportedly shocked by such self-destructive behavior. These conflicts drained resources from external defense and damaged infrastructure, making unified command nearly impossible. The military orders themselves contributed to this disunity through their intense rivalries. The warrior monks and hospitaller knights, while theoretically dedicated to the same cause, often pursued different strategies and competed for limited resources at crucial moments. This competition prevented effective coordination between the two organizations, which were best positioned to mount a meaningful defense against Muslim advances. Chroniclers from that time noted several instances where joint operations failed due to disagreements among commanders unwilling to put aside their rivalries. The desperate situation led to increasingly risky political arrangements among the remaining Christian outposts. Alliances with Mongol forces against common Muslim enemies were one such gamble. Leaders of the knightly order engaged in diplomatic missions to Mongol rulers, exploring possible military cooperation. Despite significant religious and cultural differences, these initiatives showed a practical recognition that traditional Crusader strategies had failed to stop the tide of Muslim reconquest. The loss of major inland fortifications forced a focus on key coastal centers, especially Acre. This city became the last stronghold of Christian power in the region, hosting headquarters for both major military orders and various secular authorities. The overcrowding created administrative confusion, with multiple jurisdictions claiming authority in the same confined space. Effective defense planning became nearly impossible amid such competing power centers. Castle Pilgrim and Chateau Pellerin stood as symbols of the Holy Brotherhood's commitment, even as conditions worsened. This massive coastal fortress, built with advanced defensive features, remained under the control of the religious warriors, even as surrounding territories fell to Mamluk forces. Archaeological evidence shows that the order kept improving its defenses until the final evacuation, reinforcing walls and adapting installations for the latest military technologies. This determined resistance illustrated their refusal to abandon their mission, despite increasingly dire strategic realities. The fall of Tripoli in 1289 marked the start of the final collapse for the Crusader states. This major port city was crucial for supplying the remaining Crusader territories and housed important facilities for the military religious order. When Mamluk forces under Sultan Kalawan captured Tripoli, Acre became isolated as the last major Christian stronghold on the mainland. Even with this clear warning of danger, political divisions within Acre prevented any effective preparation for the upcoming siege. Sultan al-Ashraf Halil, who took over from his father Kalawan, gathered a massive army aimed specifically at taking Acre. Contemporary accounts tell of an army of over 100,000 men, armed with the latest siege technology, including huge trebuchets that could hurl stones weighing hundreds of pounds. In contrast, Acre's defenders could only muster a few hundred knights from the warrior brotherhood and the hospitaller order, along with a few thousand infantry of varying quality. The siege kicked off in early April 1291 with the relentless bombardment of the city's strong defenses. Knights from the crusading order made periodic sorties to disrupt the Muslim siege works, but their limited numbers just weren't enough against the massive encircling force. By early May, several sections of the outer walls had been breached, forcing the defenders into desperate street fighting as enemy forces flooded into the city. Guillaume de Beaujeu, the Grand Master of the Holy Knights, died while leading a counterattack against one of these breaches, showing the order's commitment to fight rather than surrender. As the city's defenses crumbled, the remaining forces of the military brotherhood retreated to their fortress headquarters, which held out for a bit after the city had fallen. This last stronghold provided cover for civilians to evacuate before it was ultimately undermined and collapsed, reportedly taking hundreds of Mamluk attackers with it. The surviving brothers of the religious order managed to escape by sea to Cyprus, where they set up temporary headquarters on this island kingdom. From this offshore base, they launched periodic raids against the mainland coast, trying to keep some Christian military presence in the region. The tiny garrison they established at Ruad, just off the Syrian coast, was their final foothold near the Holy Land. When this last outpost fell to a determined Mamluk assault in 1303, with the entire garrison of warrior monks executed after capture, their original mission effectively came to an end. The psychological impact of these defeats on the knightly brotherhood was immense. For nearly 2 centuries, defending the Holy Land had been their main purpose and defining identity. The complete loss of Christian territories in the region raised serious questions about their future role. Unlike the Hospitallers, who smoothly shifted their focus to Rhodes and developed a new maritime mission, the Knight monks found it tough to redefine themselves after the catastrophic losses in the East. European reactions to these defeats were complex and contradictory. While they officially mourned the loss of the Holy Land, Western powers showed little real interest in launching effective recovery expeditions. Some critics blamed the holy warriors and Hospitallers for failing to prevent the collapse, even though they had limited resources compared to the overwhelming forces they faced. After these Eastern losses, the geographic focus of the Sacred Brotherhood shifted dramatically westward. Before, European commanderies mainly acted as support bases, channeling resources to frontline operations in Outremer. But now, with those front lines gone, the vast network of religious knights throughout Europe became an organization without a central purpose. Their extensive properties, banking operations, and administrative systems remained intact, but the military mission that had justified these resources no longer existed in its original form. Various proposals popped up for new crusading initiatives that might restore a Christian presence in the Holy Land. The most developed of these plans came from Jacques de Molay, who became Grand Master of the Warrior Order after the Eastern collapse. He wrote detailed memoranda to European rulers, outlining potential strategies for a new expedition and emphasizing the need for adequate preparation, unified command, and strategic coordination elements that had been missing from previous failed attempts. Unfortunately, these proposals received polite acknowledgement, but little real support from the increasingly inward-focused European monarchies. The military brotherhood also faced an additional challenge from the Hospitaller order, which pushed for merging the military orders into a single organization under unified leadership. This idea gained traction among various European rulers and some church officials, who saw advantages in consolidating these powerful institutions. However, leaders of the crusading knights, especially Jacques de Molay, strongly opposed such merger plans, insisting on maintaining their order's independent identity and unique traditions. During this period of strategic reorientation, the religious warriors continued to function as a major financial and administrative organization, with activities spread throughout Western Europe. Their banking operations served royal houses, their agricultural estates generated significant revenues, and their shipping interests remained active in Mediterranean commerce. Yet this ongoing institutional success hid vulnerabilities, as their substantial wealth drew increasing attention from cash-strapped monarchs, particularly Philip IV of France. The loss of their original mission left them with immense resources, but an increasingly questionable purpose. Without active military operations in the East to justify their privileged position, the exceptional autonomy of the knightly order from secular authority began to seem increasingly out of place. Their extensive tax exemptions, legal immunities, and direct allegiance to the Pope arrangements that had been designed to support their Holy Land mission became targets for criticism once that mission effectively ended. This period of uncertainty after the fall of Acre really set the stage for the Knights' eventual downfall. Here's the thing. This organization was built for defending Christian territories in the East, but now they found themselves with no land to protect. Their wealth, political clout, and independence were still there, but their original purpose? Gone. This shaky situation left the warrior monks open to the political games that were about to unfold in Western Europe. The irony is that their biggest defeats didn't come from personal failings. They were a result of shifting strategic realities that were completely out of their hands. The Holy Brotherhood had done an amazing job maintaining their defensive duties, even as the fortunes of the Crusaders changed. Individual knights showed incredible bravery in the final stand of doomed positions, but their discipline as an organization remained strong, even as interest in crusading faded. Sadly, that just wasn't enough against the overwhelming political and military forces that were gradually wiping out the Christian presence they were meant to protect. As the 14th century rolled in, the military religious order found itself at a crossroads. They had an impressive history, but faced an uncertain future. Their original mission was in shambles, along with the ruins of Acre. Sure, they still had plenty of resources, but they felt increasingly lost without a clear purpose. Their usual political backers were showing less interest in their new crusading ideas, which left them vulnerable to the ambitions of secular powers, especially the French crown, eager to seize their wealth and dismantle their independence. The brotherhood that had withstood 2 centuries of warfare was now up against entirely new threats from the very societies they had long protected. Conspiracy, greed, and betrayal. Dawn broke over Paris on Friday, October 13, 1307, as the city stirred to life. An extraordinary operation unfolded with clockwork precision. Royal officials bearing sealed orders moved systematically through the streets, accompanied by armed guards prepared for resistance. Their target, every knight of the Holy Order and every facility within French territory. By nightfall, the most powerful military religious order in Christendom had been decapitated in a single devastating stroke. This shocking action represented the culmination of elaborate planning by King Philip IV of France, a monarch whose financial relationship with the warrior monks had evolved from dependence to resentment and finally to predatory calculation. The arrests marked the beginning of a process that would transform the history of the Sacred Brotherhood, from operational reality to contested memory, from living institution to historical enigma. Understanding this tragic final chapter requires examining the complex motivations, accusations, and power dynamics that produced one of history's most notorious legal prosecutions. The immediate background to this catastrophe centered on Philip IV's financial difficulties. Known to contemporaries as Philip the Fair for his striking appearance, his fiscal policies had proven anything but equitable. Expensive wars with England and Flanders had depleted royal coffers. His previous financial expedients, debasing currency, confiscating Jewish property, taxing clergy against papal objections, had generated substantial resistance while providing only temporary relief. The enormous wealth controlled by the religious order presented an irresistible target for a ruler perpetually seeking new revenue sources. The king's relationship with the brotherhood had once been close. Like his predecessors, Philip had utilized the financial expertise of the Knight monks, storing royal treasures in their Paris vault and appointing their officials to treasury positions. During a Parisian riot in 1306, the king had taken refuge in the temple fortress, protected by the same organization he would later destroy. This earlier trust made the subsequent betrayal all the more remarkable. Beyond financial motivation lay broader political calculations. The exceptional autonomy of the military brotherhood from secular authority represented a challenge to Philip's vision of centralized royal power. Their direct accountability to the Pope contradicted his efforts to establish monarchical control over all institutions within French territory. Their international structure created divided loyalties, potentially undermining national cohesion. Their extensive privileges established precedents limiting royal authority that Philip systematically sought to eliminate. The king found a perfect collaborator in Guillaume de Nogaret, his chief minister and legal strategist. De Nogaret, a skilled jurist trained in Roman law, had previously orchestrated the audacious attack on Pope Boniface VIII at Anagni in 1303. This violent confrontation, intended to facilitate the Pope's forced abdication, demonstrated his willingness to employ extreme measures against even the highest spiritual authorities when royal interests demanded. He applied this same ruthless approach to developing the legal framework for the suppression of the holy warriors. De Nogaret's strategy centered on heresy accusations, the most serious charges possible in medieval jurisprudence. By categorizing the planned action as a matter of religious purification rather than political convenience, Philip's government sought to neutralize potential papal objections while justifying the seizure of assets belonging to the religious knights. The specific allegations combined traditional heresy claims with shocking elements designed to preclude public sympathy for the accused. These charges, detailed in arrest orders distributed to royal officials throughout France, painted a picture of an organization fundamentally corrupted from its original purpose. Members of the knightly order allegedly denied Christ during secret initiation ceremonies, spat upon the cross, engaged in inappropriate kissing rituals, worshipped idols, and permitted homosexual practices among members. Supporting these sensational claims were more procedural accusations regarding unauthorized absolution and financial corruption, technical violations that lacked public shock value but provided additional legal foundations for prosecution. The most infamous accusation involved the alleged worship of a mysterious head or idol called Baphomet, a term whose origins remain contested among scholars. Some suggest a linguistic corruption of Mohammed, implying Islamic influence, while others propose a connection to Gnostic traditions or pagan fertility symbols. The mysterious nature of this charge enhanced its effectiveness, allowing accusers to present the crusading brotherhood as secretly devoted to incomprehensible and presumably diabolical practices, hidden behind a facade of Christian piety. The timing of the arrests demonstrated remarkable coordination. Royal officials throughout France opened sealed orders simultaneously on the appointed morning, ensuring the military order had no opportunity to hide assets or organize resistance. Grand Master Jacques de Molay, who had been in France for consultations regarding a new crusade proposal, found himself seized alongside other senior officials at the Paris Temple. Within hours, warriors of the religious brotherhood throughout the kingdom were imprisoned, their properties secured by royal agents, and their records confiscated for examination. This swift action put Pope Clement V in a tough spot. The French-born pontiff, who owed his election to Philip's influence, got the news about the arrests only after they had already taken place. This clever move kept the Pope from stepping in to protect an order that was supposed to answer to Rome, not the king. Philip's representatives rushed their actions, claiming that defense of the faith required immediate measures, and they presented the Pope with evidence that supposedly confirmed heresy among the warrior monks. What came next marked a grim milestone in medieval Europe, the first systematic use of torture in a major political prosecution. The Knights of the Holy Order, used to the challenges of battle, were completely unprepared for the brutal tactics of professional torturers. They faced techniques designed to break both body and spirit like strappado, which dislocated shoulders and arms, foot roasting that inflicted excruciating burns, sleep deprivation, and starvation. These harsh methods chipped away at their resistance over time, forcing confessions that royal prosecutors needed to back up their accusations. Jacques de Molay, the Grand Master, initially confessed under this pressure, admitting to some charges while denying others. His confession, obtained after relentless torture, became a valuable propaganda tool for Philip's government. Royal publicists made sure this confession was widely circulated, which helped to undermine any sympathy for the imprisoned knights. The image of the order's leader admitting to corruption lent credibility to even the most outrageous claims against his fellow knights. Torture was widespread among the arrested brothers. Historical records show that very few members of the military brotherhood in French custody maintained a complete denial during interrogations. Most ended up confessing to at least some of the charges, usually focusing on ceremonial aspects like denying Christ or spitting on the cross, while pushing back against more elaborate accusations like idol worship or immoral practices. The pattern of these confessions, which shared a basic outline but varied in details, strongly suggests that they were extracted under extreme duress rather than being coordinated lies. Pope Clement found himself in a real bind. He was theoretically supposed to protect the sacred order from secular interference, but his practical dependence on French support for the papacy, having moved to Avignon, which was effectively under French control, limited his ability to stand up to Philip. His background in southern France, with a recent suppression of the Cathar heresy, had shown the dangers of religious corruption, made him more open to the idea that even respected religious organizations could harbor secret apostasy. In an attempt to regain control, Clement issued the bull Pastoralis Preeminentia in November 1307, ordering all Christian monarchs to arrest members of the knightly order in their territories. This papal directive not only legitimized Philip's initial actions, but also extended the investigation throughout Christendom, turning the French judicial process into a church-sanctioned inquiry. Clement hoped to reassert his authority while showing that he was concerned about potential heresy. Results outside France were a whole different story. Edward II of England initially pushed back against the arrests, but eventually went along with the Pope's orders. When members of the religious brotherhood in England were interrogated, without the torture that was illegal under English law, almost none confessed to any heretical activities. You could see similar trends in places like Aragon, Castile, Portugal, and German territories, where interrogations without those brutal French-style torture methods generally didn't back up the wild accusations. This clear pattern of confessions, lining up perfectly with the use of torture, hints at the made-up nature of the charges in France. Even the toughest brothers eventually cracked under the strain of extended imprisonment and judicial pressure. The leaders of the warrior monks, realizing their organization was in serious danger, tried various defensive moves. Some brought up legal technicalities about proper judicial procedures, while others argued that confessions obtained through torture were invalid. A few even managed to escape and vanish into the countryside or nearby areas. But most were stuck in a judicial system that seemed designed to reach a predetermined conclusion, no matter the facts. Things got even more complicated when some imprisoned knights started to recant their confessions after the initial torture ended. In Paris, a group of defenders stepped up, ready to stand up for the military brotherhood against the charges, claiming that procedural violations made the whole process invalid. This pushback led to renewed torture, as Philip's government was determined to keep pushing the narrative of guilt, no matter the evidence. When dozens of brothers continued to defend the order despite the torture, authorities resorted to even harsher silencing methods. On May 12, 1310, 54 knights who had recanted their confessions and offered to defend the organization were burned at the stake as relapsed heretics in a field outside Paris. This mass execution sent a clear message about the consequences of challenging the royal prosecution. Any further defense efforts quickly fell apart as the remaining brothers realized how futile and dangerous it was to resist. The message was loud and clear. Confessing was the only way to survive. While all this legal stuff dragged on with its complicated formalities, the actual disbanding of the religious knights was happening quickly. Royal administrators took inventory and took control of the properties belonging to the warrior brotherhood all over France. Their vast banking operations, agricultural lands, urban facilities, and accumulated wealth fell under the crown's management. Even though the official handling of these assets was still up in the air while the trials continued, they effectively transferred to royal control right after the arrests. The Council of Vienne, which met in 1311 to tackle the issues surrounding the military order, along with other church matters, showed Clement's ongoing uncertainty. The church leaders reviewed evidence from various regional investigations, revealing inconsistent results between the areas using torture and those following more traditional judicial methods. When several hundred representatives from the knightly brotherhood unexpectedly showed up to defend their order, the Pope decided to suspend the proceedings instead of letting them directly challenge the French narrative. Philip forced a resolution by personally showing up in Vienne with a big military escort, effectively intimidating the council into going along with his demands. Clement, realizing he couldn't really stand up to French pressure, issued the Bull Vox in Excelso in 1312, which suppressed the warrior monks through administrative papal authority instead of a formal condemnation. This technical distinction allowed for the order's dissolution without outright declaring them heretical, a way for the Pope to save face and maintain some appearance of independent judgment. A follow-up bull, Ad Providum, allocated most of the properties of the crusading brotherhood to the Hospitaller order instead of secular authorities. In reality, though, this transfer was incomplete, especially in France. where Philip kept a big chunk of the wealth from the religious order by claiming administrative costs and debts supposedly owed to the crown. The end result fit perfectly with the king's financial goals, while still pretending to stick to the idea that religious assets should stay in religious hands. The final act of this tragedy focused on Jacques de Molay and other top leaders of the military religious order who had been stuck in long imprisonment during the drawn-out proceedings. In March 1314, the Grand Master and the Preceptor of Normandy, Geoffroy de Charny, were brought to Notre Dame Cathedral for a public announcement of their sentences: life imprisonment based on their earlier confessions. What happened next shocked everyone and led to the ultimate tragedy. Standing in front of the crowd, both men suddenly took back their confessions, proclaiming the sacred brotherhood innocent of all charges, and saying their earlier statements were forced out of them through torture. This bold move left church officials scrambling, but it triggered an immediate reaction from Philip, who branded them as relapsed heretics. Without any further legal process, that very evening, the two leaders were burned at the stake on a small island in the Seine, insisting on their innocence as the flames engulfed them. Legend has it that de Molay's last words were a curse on those who caused his unjust execution, calling for both Philip and Clement to face him before God's judgment within the year. When both the king and the pope died just months later, Clement from illness in April, and Philip from a hunting accident in November, many people took this as a sign that his curse had come true. This dramatic ending solidified the story of the Holy Knights in popular culture, turning judicial murder into a legendary tale. The suppression marked a significant shift in the balance of power between secular and religious authority in Europe. A royal government had managed to dismantle an international religious organization, even with direct papal protection. The legal tactics used, especially the heresy charges that justified seizing property, set dangerous precedents for how judicial power could be wielded against inconvenient institutions. The harsh reality that enough violence could force confessions to fit any narrative exposed serious flaws in medieval legal processes. For the thousands of surviving knights outside France, this suppression brought deep personal upheaval. Men who had devoted their lives to a religious calling suddenly found themselves without a community. In many places, they received small pensions from the former properties of the warrior brotherhood, often tied to living in other religious houses where they could be kept an eye on. Their distinctive white mantles vanished, their communal life ended, and their shared mission faded away through administrative decisions rather than defeat in battle. Legacy and conclusion. The dramatic fall of the Knights Templar didn't just mark an end, it sparked a transformation. Even though the organization stopped functioning as it once did, its influence lived on, shaping the next 7 centuries of history, myth, and cultural memory. From successor groups to banking practices, from architectural wonders to popular legends, the legacy of these warrior monks is woven into many aspects of human experience. The immediate aftermath of their suppression looked different across Europe. The French crown got what it wanted by seizing a lot of the military brotherhood's assets, but other monarchs took different routes. In England, Edward II eventually followed papal orders, but ended up transferring most of the knights' properties to the Hospitallers, as required. The Iberian kingdoms showed some real creativity in handling the transition. In Portugal, King Dinas negotiated the formation of the Order of Christ, keeping the organization alive under a new name with the same members and properties. This change got the papal thumbs up in 1319. This Portuguese continuation would later play a big role in maritime expansion during the Age of Discovery. Under Prince Henry the Navigator's leadership as governor of the Order of Christ, their vast resources fueled Portuguese explorations along the African coast and eventually across the Atlantic. Ships flying the distinctive cross of the Order, which evolved from the Holy Brotherhood's emblem, took explorers to new lands. The navigational skills honed from earlier nightly maritime operations helped redefine European understanding of global geography. In Spain, the resources of the Sacred Order were split among several successor organizations, including the Orders of Montesa and Santiago. These military brotherhoods kept defending Christian territories against the remaining Muslim enclaves on the Iberian Peninsula, eventually joining in the final conquest of Granada that wrapped up the Reconquista. Similar transitions popped up across Europe, with local political conditions influencing how things played out, rather than a one-size-fits-all dissolution process. The Hospitallers, as the main beneficiaries of the properties once held by the crusading knights, grew significantly after the suppression. Their defensive roads, and later Malta against Ottoman expansion, carried on the crusading spirit that had motivated the warrior brotherhood all along. Many of the former castles and commanderies of the religious order just switched management while keeping their original defensive roles intact. The architectural legacy of this military religious order is still visible today in structures scattered across Europe and the Near East. Their unique round churches, modeled after the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, can still be found in cities like London, Paris, and Tomar. The massive castle fortifications they built still stand tall from Syria to Scotland. These physical remnants give us a real connection to their historical presence, while ongoing archaeological digs keep revealing new insights into their daily lives across these widespread sites. The financial innovations brought about by the Knights administrators outlasted their suppression, as successor institutions adopted their practices. Their banking methods influenced the rise of Italian banking houses that expanded international finance in the following centuries. The documentation techniques, credit instruments, and trust arrangements they developed became standard features of European commercial life. The idea of international banking networks providing consistent services across political borders, first fully realized by these holy warriors, laid the groundwork for modern financial systems. The legal actions taken against the religious brotherhood set some pretty unfortunate precedents that echoed throughout European history. The use of torture to force confessions that fit a predetermined narrative showed up again in later witch trials, inquisitions, and political purges. Plus, authorities often leaned on heresy accusations to seize properties, especially when they wanted to get rid of wealthy organizations. These tactics probably represent the darkest part of the legacy left by the warrior monks. They refined persecution techniques through their own suppression. Almost right after their dramatic fall, popular imagination turned the story of the night monks into legend. Jacques de Molay's supposed curse against his persecutors seemed to come true when both Philip and Clement died within a year, capturing the medieval audience's attention and creating a narrative of unjust persecution, followed by supernatural payback. Tales of secret survival sprang up, telling of knights escaping to Scotland, Switzerland, or remote Atlantic islands, supposedly carrying treasures and hidden knowledge. These legends really struck a chord in Scottish history, linking the Holy Knights to the Battle of Bannockburn, which happened soon after their downfall. According to these stories, knights fleeing from French persecution helped Robert the Bruce, playing a crucial role in his victory over the English. While we don't have solid historical proof for these tales, they created lasting connections between the mythology of the religious warriors and Scottish national identity, which were later tied to Freemasonry. The Masonic fraternity, which came to light in early 18th century England, picked up themes from the military order for its symbols and rituals. Some higher degrees in Masonic systems even claim to descend from the warrior brotherhood, presenting the medieval order as guardians of secret wisdom that has been preserved in Masonic traditions. Although serious historians don't find much evidence for direct links, these associations have firmly placed the imagery of the crusading knights within Western esoteric traditions that still influence modern spiritual movements. Modern pop culture has really cranked up the presence of the Holy Order in our collective imagination. Think about it, everything from Indiana Jones to Assassin's Creed, the Da Vinci Code, and a ton of historical novels has turned those white-mantled knights into iconic symbols of medieval mystery and hidden knowledge. Their wild historical journey, from humble beginnings to crazy power, and then a dramatic fall, creates a gripping story that storytellers love to tell across all kinds of media. This cultural afterlife has likely spread their influence way beyond what they actually achieved during their time as an institution. Historians today are digging up fresh perspectives on the history of these religious knights thanks to new archival finds and archaeological digs. The recovery of trial transcripts gives us a peek into medieval court procedures and political maneuvering. Plus, excavations at places once occupied by the military brotherhood are revealing details about their daily lives that we just can't get from old documents alone. By comparing them with other religious military orders, we can see what made them unique while also spotting similarities with other groups. The ongoing fascination with the warrior monks shows us deeper trends in Western culture. Their story highlights the push and pull between religious idealism and practical power, between the authority of institutions and the commitment of individuals, and between mystical spirituality and martial discipline. These contradictions, wrapped up in the complex figure of the warrior monk, still resonate with folks trying to figure out how spiritual values mix with real-world challenges. From just 9 knights vowing to protect pilgrims on dangerous roads, to a huge institution managing vast resources across 2 continents, their journey reflects both the promise and risks of blending religious motivation with worldly power. Their rise shows how a clear purpose and strong structure can lead to amazing growth, while their fall teaches us that wealth and independence can attract unwanted attention from competing powers. The legacy of the Knight monks goes beyond the blind admiration of fans or the skepticism of critics. Their real historical importance spans multiple areas: military innovation, financial growth, architectural achievements, and smart organizational design. They were trailblazers in creating international structures during a time of fragmented local powers. They found practical ways to tackle tough logistical challenges. Plus, they showed how religious values could inspire and maintain discipline in organizations across various environments. Even 7 centuries after Jacques de Molay's execution, the cross-emblazoned white mantle of the Holy Knight still packs a punch as a powerful symbol. Whether we see them as examples of religious dedication, victims of political persecution, pioneers of international banking, or keepers of secret wisdom, the poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon hold a special spot in Western historical memory. Their incredible story, from humble beginnings to remarkable growth and then dramatic downfall, remains a key chapter in understanding how medieval society balanced its highest ideals with its deepest contradictions. The final twist in the tale of these religious warriors might just be that an organization set up to defend physical land ended up leaving its most lasting mark through its intangible legacies, institutional models, financial innovations, architectural styles, and symbolic power. Long after the walls of Acre fell and the temple fortress was taken down, the structures they built and the stories they inspired keep shaping how we organize our institutions and understand our history. The legacy of these warrior monks stretches far beyond the lands they once defended, reaching into the realms of history, legend, and cultural memory that they could never have imagined during their 2 centuries of existence. And so, our journey into the past comes to a quiet close. If you're still awake with me, I hope this tale brought you a little peace. If you enjoyed our time together, a gentle like lets me know. And subscribing means you'll never miss the next calm adventure. If you know someone who might need a little comfort tonight, feel free to share this story with them. Thank you, truly, for being here. Until next time, I wish you the sweetest dreams.